Alistair woke up in a world that time forgot, a place where the very idea of a hot shower was still 1,000 years away. In this brutal frontier, only the strongest earned the right to lead, and it didn't take long for him to become the undisputed king of the wild clans. Now, every maiden in the settlement was desperate to carry his legacy. Time moved fast in the heart of the great forest. One night, under the glow of a silver full moon, he went out to check his perimeter traps and saw something dangling in the shadows. He crept closer, axe in hand. No growling, no struggle. It didn't seem like a beast. He raised his blade, ready for anything, but the sight waiting for him was a total shock. It was Alara, his fiercest ally, caught right in his own snare. And let's just say, she was in a very compromising position. Alistair's eyes widened, taking it all in. Alara went absolutely ballistic, screaming at him to stop staring and get her down already. He just laughed, calling it a view for the ages, while she shrieked that she was going to have his head for this. Our boy just smirked. "With those tiny feet," he teased, and just to mess with her, he leaned in and gave her foot a playful blow. Then he started a slow, deliberate massage. The elven warrior turned bright crimson, letting out a shaky breath. "Careful, Alistair, you're playing with fire here." She panicked as voices drifted closer. Before her fellow hunters could see their captain hanging there like a prize, he finally cut her loose. But hey, life as a frontier king wasn't always this easy. Before the women adored him, the men were trying to put his head on a pike. Let's rewind to the beginning to see how this mess actually started. Truth is, he first woke up in this strange realm while reaching for a handful of stream water to wash his face. He was lost. Yesterday, he was just a normal guy shopping in the capital city. Suddenly, he heard rough voices echoing through the trees. A group of wild men approached, shouting in a tongue he didn't know. He actually thought they were just over-dedicated actors at first. He tried asking for a way out, but the response. A sharpened bone whizzed past his ear, missing him by an inch. Death missed him by a hair, and people still say 7 centimeters isn't much. He took off sprinting with the savages howling right on his heels. In his head, he was safe. Back home, he was a star runner. They'd never catch him. Wrong. A jagged spear sliced right through his side. Suddenly, a voice boomed in his mind. The survival system had finally activated. The mission? Survive for 12 hours to earn a power boost and a traveler's gift. But a massive, hairy brute already had him in his sights. A heavy club was hurled with lethal force. Alistair sprinted as fast as his legs would carry him, but it was too late. A blow to the neck blacked him out instantly. When he woke up, he was a prisoner in their camp, but because he'd stayed alive, the rewards were his. He dumped his first point into raw strength and ripped open that survival crate. Just like that, he understood every language, gained a master's survival guide, and unlocked a magical map of the entire region. He even gained a legendary Earthbreaker axe, along with expert knowledge of the jungle and ancient medicine. He looked at the wildmen standing over him. Now he could understand them perfectly. The man was boasting about his kills, while the woman, she was already planning to have his child. Guess child support hadn't been invented yet. Alistair realized he was in a real-life kingdom-building game, and it was still in the early stages. This was his chance. He wasn't just going to survive, he was going to become a Grand Duke or maybe even a god in these lands. He commanded the system to boost his strength and equip the Earthbreaker axe. Power surged through his veins, and Alistair snapped his bindings like they were made of thread. But he was spotted immediately by 2 massive warriors, Thorn and Langdon. Thorn barked orders to seal the camp. He and Langdon stepped forward, sneering that there was no way out for him. Full of swagger, Alistair roared back, asking how they dared disrespect their sovereign. Thorn just stared. "What sovereign are you talking about?" Seeing Langdon's calm gaze, Alistair figured he was the one truly in charge. He declared the heavens had sent him to rule, and since they'd offended him, judgment was coming. That did it. Thorn went berserk and charged. Right then, the system pinged with a new mission: intimidate the clan and force them to kneel. Become their new lord. The stakes: fail, and the system would strip him of his legendary axe forever. Alistair went tense. Without that weapon, he wouldn't last a day. Refusing to lose, he met Thorn's massive attack head-on. The impact was so violent it literally cracked the ground beneath them. Alistair was stunned. These people were unnaturally strong. But he was stronger. He pushed back with everything he had, and to his surprise, Thorn's weapon was sliced clean in half. The entire camp went dead silent, paralyzed by the display of power. Then Alistair's instincts screamed. Something was wrong. He was right. Thorn didn't back down. He yelled for the entire tribe to rush him at once. Totally blindsided, Alistair turned and bolted. He thought this was a noble duel, but they were ganging up on one guy like a pack of wolves. As a young warrior lunged, Alistair slipped past the blade and fired back with a lethal counterstrike in one smooth motion. Furious, Alaric snaps. He warns the savages not to push their luck, claiming he'll drag 5 of them to hell with him before he drops. He orders them to back off now. Inside, he's sweating. If these brutes swarm him, he's dead in seconds. Then something weird happens. Every single tribesman panics and bolts. Alaric is standing there, completely lost, until his system pings with a side quest. Save the outcasts by driving off a ferocious saber-tooth. And of course, it's already been accepted automatically. Typical. At first, Alaric just stares at the screen. Confusion. Then, pure terror. He realizes a massive saber-tooth cat is standing right behind him. The second he sees those fangs, he's running for his life. The beast is relentless. It's right on his heels, swiping at him as he flees through the brush. Panicked, Alaric wonders why everything in this godforsaken place wants to eat him. And why would the system give him a suicide mission like this? One bite from that monster would take half his body. Then, pain. A claw rakes his side, leaving him badly wounded. Alaric realizes a head-on fight is a death sentence. He forces himself to breathe. Calm down, think. He spots smoke rising from a nearby camp and remembers the golden rule. Beasts fear the flame. He's going to use that. He starts plotting his escape, even screaming a challenge at the beast to face him. When it lunges, Alaric tries a low slide to evade, but the monster is smarter. It uses his body like a springboard and leaps off him. Shaken, Alaric bolts again. Note to self, movies lied. No other choice, he dashes for the bonfire, using every bit of cover to stay alive. Dodging and weaving, Alaric finally hits the firelight. He grabs a burning brand and swings it at the predator. Relief washes over him. The beast actually flinches. It's afraid of the light. Alaric shouts for it to come get some, but deep down, he's praying it just leaves. Suddenly, a strange sound echoes. Alaric freezes. Is there something even bigger coming? Another roar rips through the air and the saber-tooth just snaps. It bolts in pure terror. Alaric watches it vanish, wondering what could possibly scare a monster like that. If it's running, what should he do? Then the system chimes. Mission complete. Reward 2 attribute points. Hearing those sounds again, Alaric decides not to stick around. Safety first. He tells the system to dump 1 point into strength and 1 into agility. Instantly, his body feels different. He sprints back toward the tribesmen like a gust of wind. He can feel it immediately. He's faster, lighter, and ready for more. Silas is stunned to see him alive. He asks how the saber-tooth didn't tear him apart. Alaric just smirks. That thing, just an overgrown kitty. He claims he beat it so badly it ran off crying. He grins, hoping these primitives finally start respecting their king. Then another mission pops up. Help them build homes, forge a tribe, and grow the population to 50 within 18 days. He does the math. Only 15 people, kids included. To hit 50, he'll have to conquer and absorb other clans. That night, the tribe sleeps, but Alaric is wide awake. He's starving. He looks around and notices these idiots are sleeping without even posting a guard. Unbelievable. But his stomach is screaming, and food is the priority. He remembers that roasted meat from earlier, but hesitates. If something scared that saber-tooth, something truly nightmare fuel must be lurking nearby. Alaric tries to stay cool. He needs to eat, and hopefully he won't run into whatever that monster was. Axe in hand, He cautiously heads back to where he saw the meat. After a while, he reaches the area. He moves like a shadow, alert for any movement. As he gets closer, he spots other kills nearby too. Now that he's the boss, he can't just think about his own stomach. He gathers up the extra prey for the group. But on the way back, a chill runs down his spine. Suddenly, boom, he falls into a pit. Furious, Alaric screams, wondering who dug a hole there. Then he looks closer. This isn't a hole. It's a massive footprint, some kind of giant beast, a dinosaur. It hits him then. After the saber-tooth, he should have realized. This isn't just a primitive land. It's a whole era filled with history's most terrifying and deadly predators. No time to waste. Alaric knows he needs to find a safe fortress for everyone, and fast. The next morning, the tribesmen are already brawling over food. Fed up, Alaric roars at them to stop snatching. He realizes they don't know a thing about sharing or saving. There's a long road of teaching ahead. Alaric declares that the food goes to the hunters first. Silas speaks up, explaining they hunt in rotations. Yesterday was him, Ewan, and Hugo. Today, Lucan, Hubert, and Lance are up. But Silas adds one more thing. Everyone wants to hunt if their king is leading the way. The rest of the group is on board, but Arthur notices young Silas watching from the shadows. Likely terrified the Lord is still holding a grudge after their earlier run-in. Arthur realizes the boy is paralyzed by fear, so he decides a little kindness is the best way to mend fences, announcing that anyone willing to build a future is welcome to join his journey. Their mission, to find the perfect land for a permanent stronghold. Hearing this, a young girl named Mealy's steps forward, her eyes wide as she asks what a home actually is. Arthur takes a moment to explain, telling her that a home is where they'll finally live together as one united house. It's a foundation, like the deep roots of an ancient oak, that will nourish this family and protect every generation that follows. Mealy's absolutely beams, rushing over to pull the Lord into a hug while begging to live by his side forever. Arthur just smiles and promises that soon they'll all be one great family. The girl gets so swept up in the excitement that she blurts out to everyone that the sovereign wants to live with her and raise a line of heirs. Trying to get things back on track, Sir Gareth clears his throat and asks where exactly this new kingdom is supposed to be built. Arthur gathers the council and lays out the vision. They need a vast expanse protected by mountains to the north and fed by rushing rivers to the south. It has to be a place with fresh water for the crops, lush meadows for the livestock, and plenty of stone and timber for the castle walls. Safety is the priority, so they'll need fertile soil for farming and deep forests for building nearby. Arthur then adds that they should settle near the coast, as a river delta would provide rich earth and a gateway to the high seas. Suddenly, Silas speaks up. He knows a place exactly like that. Impressed, Arthur asks the boy to lead the way, but Silas hesitates, warning that while the land is close, it's far too dangerous to enter. Apparently, a massive herd of cows has claimed the area, which just leaves Arthur completely baffled. Since when is lunch a terrifying threat? He decides the herd will be their first great feast and orders the men to sharpen their blades. They begin the trek east toward their destiny, eventually reaching the outskirts of the territory Silas described. Silas assures them the path is clear for now, so Arthur tells the group to keep their heads up. There's no need to fear the saber cat anymore since he's already driven it off. He promises them that if the beast ever dares to return, he'll be the one to strike it down. Silas explains that once they crest the mountain peak, they'll have a bird's-eye view of where the herd gathers to graze. But the second they reach the summit, Silas frantically signals for everyone to stay low. The cows are just below them, and Arthur immediately wonders if something even deadlier is lurking nearby. Then the scent of the salt air hits him. He consults his divine map system, and what he sees is absolutely perfect. This isn't just a campsite, it's the site of a future capital. Silas suddenly yanks him back, whispering for total silence because the herd has ears like a hawk. Arthur checks his mental archives and identifies 3 rare plants and 2 local species in the valley ahead. He spots green sunflower stalks, dragonvine, and massive sabaki shrubs, alongside gray squirrels and a swarm of pincer wasps. There's still no data on these deadly cows, so Arthur asks Silas for their exact location. Silas points toward a dense thicket near the river bend and offers to scout them even closer. 30 minutes of creeping through the brush later, they hit the edge of the woods where Silas warns that a single step could alert the beasts. Arthur finds the silence eerie and can't figure out why Silas is this spooked by farm animals, until his sensory scan suddenly goes red, warning him of a Titan-class monster. To his surprise, the scan only picks up one creature, making Arthur wonder if Silas has his facts mixed up. But before he can ask, a massive tree suddenly shifts. Silas tells him to look up, and Arthur completely freezes. What in the name of the gods is he looking at? The system pings with a terrifying ID, an obsidian behemoth, an iron black-horned bull. Shaking behind a rock, Sir Gareth whispers, asking if the plan is seriously to hunt a monster that size. Arthur, heart hammering against his ribs, tells them to prepare an ambush while he goes in to test its strength. The clan looks at him with pure awe, thinking their lord is the bravest man alive. But the second he's behind cover, Arthur is practically in tears, wondering how his life became such a disaster. He can't let his people die, so he has to bet everything on his agility. He takes another look and realizes the beast's front hooves are literally bigger than he is. He waits for the perfect opening, trying to keep his cool as he steps out to greet the monster. Big mistake. The instant it spots him, its face contorts in rage, and it lets out a bone-shaking roar before the entire herd charges like a mountain collapsing. Arthur bolts, diving across the river and screaming for the beasts to stop chasing him. Back with the house, they've totally misinterpreted the chaos, believing their king is heroically drawing the entire herd away to keep them safe. While they praise his courage, Arthur hurls himself off a steep ridge and barely sticks the landing. Suddenly, the whole cliffside shudders, and Arthur wonders if the world is ending. He looks down and sees one of the behemoths has smashed headfirst into the rock because it was moving too fast to stop. That's the spark he needed. He realizes these massive tanks can't climb for anything, giving him a way to pick them off one by one. He looks back at the angry herd waiting below and realizes there's no going back. His only option is to keep climbing. Arthur scrambles to the highest point of the cliff, and when he finally reaches the top, the view takes his breath away. This is it, the perfect land. Right then and there, he vows to build an empire that the world will never forget. Arthur felt it the fire. His journey had finally, truly begun. Meanwhile, Silas watched the Ironhide herd vanish, wondering why on earth their king had abandoned them. Sir Gareth shook his head, certain the Lord had been trampled into the dirt by those massive beasts. He scaled a great oak to search for the body, hoping to at least salvage the Lord's legendary axe. But the second he reached the branch, wham! The axe whistled through the air and embedded itself right next to his head. Gareth froze, paralyzed with shock. Arthur just smirked from below. Thinking of planning my funeral already, Gareth? Bold move. Silas and the knights finally exhaled. Their leader was alive. Gareth, still trembling, asked if those iron hides were really as invincible as they looked. Arthur's plan: use the beast's meat to forge bodies of iron. So, he grinned, who's hungry for some monster steak? Silas and Gareth weren't having it. We can't kill them, they argued, and even if we did, we aren't eating that cursed meat. Arthur's eyes flashed with cold steel. Did I ask for an opinion? I asked for an answer. Terrified, the knights instantly shouted, "Yes, my lord." They were in. No choice now. Arthur promised to teach them the art of the forge and the secrets of the hunt. 3 days, that's all they had. To show them what was coming, Arthur split a massive ironwood tree in half with one single, devastating slash. The vanguard was speechless, but Gareth, being Gareth, stepped up and asked why he'd waste a tree that didn't even bear fruit. Arthur just looked at him. "We're making weapons, you fool. Now, eyes open and watch closely." He began showing them how to sharpen wooden poles into lethal spears. As he worked, Arthur felt his technical mastery reaching a new peak. Then came the demo. Arthur launched a spear with such force it left the entire tribe absolutely floored. Before this, they were just gatherers. They never imagined a simple piece of wood could become a deadly instrument of war. Everyone wanted a turn. Arthur told Garrick to go first, while he continued crafting a whole arsenal for the clan. Within hours, the entire clearing was filled with the sound of training. The vanguard was becoming an army. Time for a real test. Arthur called Lionel and Hugh over. "Both of you, attack me together, don't hold back." They charged with pure fury, but Arthur slipped through their strikes like a ghost. He countered instantly, knocking Hugh unconscious. Enraged, Lionel charged again, and this time he actually managed to draw a drop of the Lord's blood. The air went cold. Everyone stared in horror. Arthur just looked at Lionel. "If this spear had a sharpened tip, you'd be a corpse right now." Lionel fell to his knees, shouting, "The Lord is like a god. We can never defeat him." "You're relying on raw muscle," Arthur corrected. "The spear's power is in its point. Precision beats strength every single time." Next up, accuracy. He set up a distant target and ordered them to strike it from afar. One by one, they tried. One by one, they failed. Not a single spear even came close to the mark. Arthur started to worry. Maybe they lacked the talent. Maybe he'd pushed too fast. Then, thwack. Out of nowhere, a spear buried itself right in the center. Arthur blinked. Total silence from the crowd. He turned and saw young Julian standing there, calm as ever. "Did you throw that?" Arthur asked. Julian just looked at him and said, "Did I win, my lord?" "Yes," Arthur smiled, handing him 2 master-crafted spears as a reward. Suddenly, a scout came sprinting in. A great beast was approaching the camp. Arthur didn't panic. He ordered everyone to battle stations. Inside, he was thrilled. This was the perfect final exam. A dire shadow beast erupted from the forest, its roar shaking the very ground. Arthur charged head-on. "Looks like dinner's served." "Stay focused, follow my lead," Arthur shouted. "Surround it, wait for my signal to strike." He engaged first, and somehow the beast's supernatural speed began to falter. "Garrick, Silas, now from the rear." The spears hit home, but the beast went into a berserk rage. It smashed Arthur back with a blow so powerful his spear snapped like a toothpick. He needed to move, but he was pinned. Suddenly, 𝑑𝒓𝒊𝒎𝒊𝒕𝒊𝒗𝒆, Julian launched a spear that hit the beast square in its mouth. Talk about precision. While the others rained spears down on the monster, Silas was already perched in the trees above, waiting for his moment. Trapped and bleeding, the beast tried to bolt. Arthur cut off its escape. "Silas, finish it." Silas plummeted from the branches, driving his spear deep into the beast's skull. The creature went into a final, violent frenzy, making everyone's blood run cold. Silas was in the crosshairs, still hanging onto his weapon. Arthur didn't hesitate. He sprinted, leaped high, and brought his legendary axe down with everything he had. Boom! An explosion of power rocked the forest, and the entire area vanished into a thick cloud of smoke. "Is the Lord alive?" the knights cried out. Arthur's voice drifted through the haze. "Stop your whining, you sound like you're summoning ghosts." He looked at his men and grinned. "Well done, tonight we feast like kings." The cheer that followed shook the trees. He gave Silas a nod of respect, then turned to the crowd. "Julian, you're the most valuable player of this hunt." From that day on, Julian became his right hand in the field, testing every new weapon Arthur forged. Back at the settlement later on, Garrick was already busy exaggerating his part in the kill to anyone who would listen. Just then, Lady Alara walked by carrying a massive haul of meat. Garrick didn't miss a beat. "Hey, hand that over to the hero, will ya?" Alara refused, insisting the best meat be saved for their king. She offered a piece to Cade, but he was horrified. Were they seriously planning to eat this raw? Alara just blinked at him, genuinely confused why that would even be an issue. Cade remembered them using fire once before, so he couldn't wrap his head around why they'd gone back to eating like savages. Alara explained they'd lost their flame and had no way to get it back. That's when it hit Cade. Fire was the spark that started every great civilization. It kept beasts at bay, turned a cold cave into a home, and made food actually edible. He decided his tribe needed one more miracle. He was going to show these people how to master the flame once and for all. He grabbed a broken spear and began working it against a block of wood, searching for that first hint of heat. He showed them how to pack dry shavings into the wood, rolling the stick between his palms to build the friction needed to start a fire. When the first flame flickered to life, the tribe was stunned. Garrick started screaming at the top of his lungs that their king had created fire. He wanted the whole world to hear, but Cade quickly shut him up. Keeping a low profile was more important than fame right now. Boom, 10 legacy points earned. Cade realized then that these points were actually going to be pretty easy to rack up. He wasn't sure what they were for at first, but a quick check of the interface changed everything. Those points could identify ancient heritage seals, though each scan would cost him 10 points a pop. While Cade was processing that, Silas came over with some news. While butchering the boar, he noticed the animal had been nursing. That meant cubs were nearby. After a quick search, they found them, and a new side quest immediately popped up for Cade. Mission: capture the boar cubs and domesticate them. The system asked if he was ready to accept the challenge. Cade sent Alara and Silas out to bring them back, warning them to be extremely careful. He needed every single one of those piglets alive and well. The two took off toward the woods while Cade stayed behind. He had to build a proper pen before they returned with the cargo. He called for Garrick. The big guy had eaten his fill, so it was time to put him to work. By evening, Garrick was hauling heavy branches, complaining to his friends about why the king needed so much lumber. When they got back to camp, Garrick saw the others making something totally new. Confused, he asked Harlan what on earth it was. Harlan called it grass rope and said it was way stronger than the vines they usually used. He even showed him the technique. You had to smooth the straw first, then braid the strands together to create a bond that wouldn't snap. Garrick just got more annoyed because he still didn't get the point. Cade yelled at him to stop daydreaming and bring the wood over. He had the whole tribe lashing branches together with the new rope, working to build 5 sturdy wooden frames. Cade led them in setting the frames into pits he dug, lashing the tops into a cage, and covering it all neatly with straw. The second the structure was finished, things got weird. The whole tribe rushed into the pen and started fighting over it. They thought it was a palace where they'd live and bear the king's children. Cade stood there, totally stunned. "Guys, this isn't for you." Just then, Silas and Alara arrived with the cubs in tow. Cade told Silas to put the boars inside the pen. Garrick literally burst into tears, shouting that the king couldn't be serious. He kept protesting, asking how a home this luxurious could be wasted on wild animals. Aiden clung to Cade, agreeing with every word. They were desperate to live in that nest, just so they could cuddle up with their king at night. Cade furiously shoved them off, making it very clear he had zero interest in cuddling with grown men. He told them if they wanted the pigsty so bad, they could have it, but they'd be banned from the real houses he was planning next. Aiden froze. If a better house was coming, Aiden was out. He quickly suggested that Cade just let Garrick have this one instead. Now Garrick didn't want it either. Cade ignored the whining and had Silas move all the boars into their new home. Hugh came over, scratching his head. Why on earth were they raising these animals if they were supposed to be food? Cade just asked him one thing. Do you want to have plenty to eat without ever having to hunt again? Harlan's eyes lit up. Cade explained that breeding them meant a steady food supply. Quest complete, and Cade finally got his reward. He opened the supply chest to find a packet of salt and a new recipe for fried clams. Cade stared at the loot and wondered, was the system really trying to turn him into a professional chef? Despite their primitive tech, the system hinted that finishing these cooking tasks would unlock some seriously special rewards. So Cade decided to give it a shot. Late that night, while the tribe slept, only Cade and Silas remained awake. Cade thanked Silas for all his hard work. Silas admitted that since he'd caused trouble when he was first captured, he felt he had to earn his keep. Cade just laughed and pulled him into a hug. He wasn't holding any grudges. They were in this together now. Arthur asked if there were any other noble houses nearby. Samuel admitted they'd encountered a few, but they were anything but friendly, and apparently they looked nothing like their own kin. Arthur leaned in, his voice low. "Tell me exactly where these territories lie." Samuel listed them off. There were 3 main powers in the region: the House of Willow, the Iron Coast Raiders, and the formidable House Granite. They weren't close. Reaching any of their borders meant at least a full day and night of hard travel through treacherous terrain. Arthur demanded a full report on each. Samuel started with House Willow, around 40 souls. They weren't much for war, but they moved like the wind and were led by a remarkably powerful lady. Then there were the Iron Coast Raiders. Similar numbers, but far more bloodthirsty. According to Samuel, those savages were constantly at each other's throats, fighting over scraps within their own ranks. Finally, he described House Granite, the true heavyweights of the region. They held a fortress in the southwestern mountains and only descended to the lowlands on rare, terrifying occasions. Samuel's voice dropped to a whisper. Rumor had it their lord possessed divine strength, supposedly able to throttle a mountain lion with his bare hands. Arthur absorbed it all. If the scout's intel held water, he knew exactly what his next move had to be. House Willow was the perfect candidate for his first alliance. The others were far too volatile, meaning he'd need a diplomatic touch to bring those peaceful folks into the fold. Suddenly, he felt a warmth at his back. Arthur spun around to find Lady Amelia practically glued to him in a surprise hug. She pouted, asking why on earth he wasn't resting yet. "Maybe you'd prefer to do something more exciting with me," she teased. Arthur went stiff as a board. Firm no. Amelia then struck a playful pose, purring and asking if she looked like a little kitten. Panic. Arthur scrambled, grabbing Samuel's hand and claiming the scout desperately needed help with official business. He promised to talk to her later, and then bolted into the night with his scout. Amelia looked a bit stung by the rejection, but by dawn, the scene changed. Arthur and Samuel were staked out by the cliffs, waiting for the Iron Coast Raiders to show their faces. Right on time, the raiders appeared on the shore, closing in on a massive stag for the hunt. Arthur felt a surge of relief. A whole night of waiting finally paid off. But then, chaos. The raiders immediately started brawling with one another, fighting like dogs over the fresh kill. He watched them, calculating. If he could absorb them, his kingdom wouldn't just gain soldiers. They'd secure vital coastal resources. Samuel was the voice of reason, though. He pointed out they were outnumbered 2-1. A direct assault, suicide. Arthur knew he needed an edge, superior steel. But first, they had to handle the wild cattle herd roaming the plains. Those raw materials would be the key to forging better gear. With the plan set, they headed back to the stronghold, and the mood instantly brightened the moment Arthur stepped through the gates. Sir Alistair sighed in relief, admitting the men thought their king had actually abandoned them for good. Arthur apologized for the worry but kept it brief. "No time for rest," he told them. "We've got work to do." He ordered Alistair to keep the archers sharp and put Captain Heward in charge of the infantry drills. He gave them exactly 1 day to reach peak combat readiness. That's when Amelia reappeared, holding a soft leaf and chirping about how pleasant it was for personal hygiene after a trip to the latrine. Arthur cleared his throat, trying to stay focused. "I actually need help forging spears. Gather the women and start collecting sharp flint from the river." A while later, Amelia returned with the ladies, each lugging heavy stones. She looked up hopefully, asking if these would work for the forge. Arthur gave a sharp nod. He showed them the process, grinding the flint against a wet whetstone until it had a razor-sharp edge. Then, he explained, you lash the stone to a sturdy wooden shaft with heavy twine. Just like that, the first stone-tipped spears were born. The women were wide-eyed with awe. But Arthur, he was just annoyed that the system only granted him a single measly point for the invention. He pushed the frustration aside. "Keep at it," he commanded. "I want to see what you can produce by sundown." Suddenly, Amelia called him over. She'd already finished one. It was a perfect double-edged spearhead, and Arthur couldn't help but praise her craftsmanship. She beamed under the compliment. And in that moment, ding, Arthur unlocked a hidden perk, talent discovery. He scanned Amelia, and the system flagged her as a master artisan. She caught him staring and blushed deep red. "My lord, why are you looking at me like that?" Arthur ignored the question, his mind racing. He told the women to forget the rest and churn out as many spears and axes as possible. Piece by piece, the pile grew to 30 weapons. When he checked the tally, Arthur realized Amelia had crafted more than half of them herself. Then he saw her hands, raw, scraped, and bleeding from the rough stone. When he showed genuine concern, Amelia's entire face turned scarlet. Instantly, the other girls crowded in, pouting and asking if he cared about their hands, too. Arthur tried to explain it wasn't like that, but they were already closing in on him. Time for a tactical retreat. He shouted that they'd done enough for the day and fled the scene as fast as his legs could carry him. He headed straight for the training grounds to check the men. Suddenly, whoosh, a massive practice log came flying right at his head. He ducked just in time. Turns out it was part of the new combat drill. Sir Cedric was clearly running a brutal, effective training session. "Status report," Arthur called out. Cedric wiped sweat from his brow, reporting that the men had improved leaps and bounds. They were hitting targets with terrifying precision. Arthur's talent discovery kicked in again. Cedric was no ordinary soldier. He was a grandmaster of projectiles. Cedric added one last detail. Young Lucan was a beast in terms of raw strength, but his timing was messy. Apparently, the kid only reached his full potential when fighting side by side with Sir Alistair. Alaric noted that Langston was the first to truly master the spear. But what really blew his mind? The insane tag team between Harold and Cedric. Alone, they were just decent, but together, they were like a machine, cycling 4 spears at once with terrifying precision. Alaric was beyond impressed. At this rate, taking down that herd of great bulls was going to be a walk in the park. Cedric, though, looked hesitant. He asked if the Lord was actually serious. Alaric nodded, but he wasn't taking any chances. He revealed they'd be bringing a secret weapon. Harold blinked, completely caught off guard. "A secret weapon, now." Alaric pulled out a handful of oily, black leaves. "Look closely," he commanded the group. "Go, gather every single one you can find." Then came the grim warning. "Do not touch these if you have a cut. This plant is a natural paralytic, it'll freeze you solid." That night, the sound of stone on stone filled the air as Alaric worked. Elena arrived with a bundle of spears, tilting her head. "Why the hollow in the rock, Alaric?" Alaric just grinned. "It's a mortar, trust me, you'll see why in a minute." He told her to get the women together and use the stone to grind those leaves into a thick paste, then smear it over every spear tip. Lord Ludlow and the men wanted to help, but Alaric stopped them. "Get some sleep," he told them. "I'm going to need every ounce of your strength for the hunt tomorrow." Morning came faster than expected. Alaric was sitting by the fire, seasoning his breakfast with a bit of salt. Suddenly, thwack, Elena pinned a spear into the ground right next to him. "The coating's finished." Alaric stood up, his face set. He ordered the women to stay back and protect the camp and the children. "The rest of you, with me, to the mountain. Let's move." The tribe erupted in a roar of excitement, grabbing their gear with white-knuckled grips. They were finally ready to show those beasts what happens when you mess with their people. After a grueling trek, they reached the summit of Cinder Peak. Aidan looked over the edge, his voice trembling. "Is it really okay for our lord to act as bait all by himself?" He was clearly terrified for his leader. Cedric didn't even flinch. "Our lord is a monster in his own right. He'll be fine." Samuel cut through the chatter. Something was moving down by the river. It was go time. Cedric barked at Elena and the women to keep the spears coming at the perfect tempo, especially for Samuel once they hit their positions. Their lord was putting his life on the line down there. Losing him wasn't just a failure, it was the end of everything. So here's how the madness actually started. 10 minutes earlier, Alaric was prowling near the herd. He knew that retreating to the cliffs of Stone Mountain was the safest play, but he decided to get risky and lure a single target first. He stepped into the open, found a smaller bull and pelted it with a heavy stone. Then he started shouting, mocking the beast like he owned the place. It worked too well. The bull went into a blind rage, and suddenly 3 massive bulls were thundering straight for him. Alaric bolted, lungs burning, screaming for Cedric to lock his sights on the first bull in line. Cedric didn't miss a beat. Fire! A rain of spears whistled through the air all at once. Direct hits. The bulls were staggered, blood spray painting the grass. Using that split second of chaos, Samuel aimed for the gaps in their armor, driving spears straight into their thick necks. The beasts slammed into the mountain base. Alaric tried to scramble up a ledge, but his foot slipped. At the last second, Cedric's hand shot out, catching him and hauling him to the safety of the rocks. "Don't stop," Alaric roared. "Keep the pressure on while they're reeling." The assault intensified. Cedric stepped to the front, calling out every strike and directing the flow of the battle like a seasoned general. Watching him, Alaric saw it, that raw leadership spark. He realized right then that Cedric was someone worth grooming into a true commander for the kingdom. A few minutes later, Cedric reported that the bulls were finally starting to settle. Alaric smiled. The tranquilizer was hitting their systems faster than he'd hoped. But then Samuel's voice cracked the air. "He heard, the rest of them are coming." Alaric was stunned by their speed. They were flying. Still, he kept his voice steady. "Don't panic. Everyone stay calm. This is part of the plan." They just had to finish the 3 below and make sure not a single one escaped. The bulls tried to back off, but they were sluggish, their legs turning to lead. The poison had taken hold. "Target the legs," Alaric shouted. "Break their gait, don't let them run." Cedric gave the signal. The final volley flew, and the 3 bulls finally collapsed into the dirt, paralyzed. Alaric called for a halt, but Cedric protested. "This isn't the time to be soft, my lord. We have to put them down before the others arrive." Alaric ignored the heat of the moment. "How many spears do we have left?" Alina checked the bundle. 28. Alaric looked at Samuel. "Count the incoming herd." Samuel's face went pale. "At least 20, my lord," Alaric nodded. "Exactly, that's why we stop." They were running on fumes. Harold looked confused. "So we just leave them after all that work?" "No," Alaric said, his eyes narrowing. "I never planned for us to take on the whole herd in a fair fight. That's a suicide mission. From the very beginning, the target was the alpha. Once the king falls, the rest of the pack will scatter like leaves in the wind. To catch a king, you need the perfect bait. Those 3 bulls, they had to stay alive and screaming to draw the leader out." Alaric admitted it was a messy start. Those extra 2 bulls cost them way more resources than he'd calculated. Suddenly, Samuel let out a strangled cry. "I see him, the leader!" And man, it looked like a literal mountain of muscle. The alpha let out a roar that shook the very ground, and the entire herd charged the mountain like a living, battering ram. For a second, Alaric wondered, had the beasts gone completely insane? But Cedric quickly realized the Beast King had no intention of clashing just yet. Then, the ground groaned. The very mountain was beginning to tear apart. Cedric roared for his men to retreat and find cover, but Lady Myra couldn't clear the ledge in time and plummeted as the cliffside shattered. Without a single second of hesitation, Cedric dove straight into the abyss after her, screaming for Sir Alaric to follow. Hugo and Lance plunged down as well to lend their blades. Now, there was no more hiding. It was time for war. Hugo asked Alaric if they should charge the herd of beasts, but Alaric barked at him to stay steady and wait for their leader's command. Cedric, meanwhile, was on edge. He realized the Beast King had already sniffed out his trap. That level of intelligence, it was beyond frustrating. Captain Silas ordered the men remaining on the ridge to go protect their lord, but Cedric's voice boomed over the chaos, telling them to stay put. They needed the high ground to rain down spears. Then, the real bloodbath began. Cedric swung his heavy war axe while the others thrust their pikes and stone blades in a frantic dance of death. By working as one, defending and striking in coordinated waves, they actually managed to carve through the thick hides of the beasts. Silas saw the opening and urged the men above to unleash a literal rain of steel down onto the herd. Several beasts dropped dead. Suddenly, the entire herd went dead silent as the king seemed to growl a command to his subjects. To Cedric's total shock, the beasts began to pull back. Was the king ordering a retreat just so he could finish this fight alone? Then the skies opened up. Rain poured down, and the beast king stepped forward, took a massive breath, and blasted a torrent of dragon fire from its maw. "Scatter!" Cedric screamed. The blast was so violent it tore a tunnel straight through the mountain, carving a path all the way to the summit. The vanguard was frozen in horror. Nobody knew if it was a roar or a shockwave, but that single impact crushed their morale in 3 seconds flat. Seeing his men falter, Cedric ordered Anna to take Myra and the others north, while he stepped into the line of fire to draw the king's gaze. He signaled Silas to wait for his mark and stood face to face with the monster, declaring that he alone would be its opponent. They slammed into each other head-on, with Cedric straining every muscle to hold the beast back. But the beast king was too strong and hurled him aside like a rag doll. Crashing to the ground, Cedric eyed the tunnel the monster had just blasted open. The king charged, slamming into the mountain with a force that triggered a massive explosion. Everyone watching went pale, certain their leader was dead. Even so, they refused to run. They resolved to fight until the last man stood. Then, out of the smoke, a flash of steel. Cedric's axe bit deep into the king's skull. He was alive. He'd survived by diving into the tunnel just before the impact. Cedric even mocked the monster for its bad aim, but inside, he knew he was hanging on by a thread. Seeing Cedric standing tall, a wave of relief washed over the men, but he shouted at Silas to stay sharp and wait for the signal. The struggle continued as Anna and Hugo tried to distract the king, desperate to give Cedric an opening from the rear. Anna bravely lunged in, only to be caught and gored by the beast's massive horn. Cedric charged forward, slashing the monster across the eyes to free Anna from its horn. The king unleashed another burst of fire, but everyone dove for cover as Cedric answered with a perfect, clean strike. The blade bit deep, opening a massive, bleeding gash in the monster's side. Cedric roared for Silas and Samuel to aim their spears at that exact spot. They hit the mark perfectly, and the beast king staggered before crashing heavily to the dirt. For a heartbeat, the men thought they'd actually won and started to cheer. But Cedric, he didn't like the look of this. Even with their leader down, the rest of the herd just stood there, waiting. Then, from the shadows, the king rose again and lunged at Cedric, exhaling a furious stream of flame. Silas and Henry were absolutely paralyzed by the sight. Cedric went cold. He realized he'd let his guard down at the worst possible moment. The king ripped a spear from its own body and hurled it straight at Cedric's chest. Wounded and too slow to dodge, Cedric knew this was the end. But then Myra stepped between them. She took the spear herself. Cedric just froze, unable to believe his eyes. A flood of memories with Myra flashed before him. And then, a burst of pure, unadulterated rage exploded in his chest. Even as the system warned that his body was reaching its breaking point, Cedric ignored the alerts and lunged straight at the king. He brought his axe down with every ounce of strength he possessed, literally cleaving the king from head to tail. This time, the monster was truly split in two. Drenched in blood and consumed by fury, Cedric roared at the remaining beasts to come and get some. He challenged any creature that wanted to die to step forward. The herd glanced at one another, and as Cedric took one step toward them, they broke and fled in absolute panic. Once the field was clear, Cedric finally let out a breath, but his system immediately flashed a red warning: life signs critical. A second later, he coughed up a spray of blood, and the world started to fade to black as he sank to the ground. His men rushed to his side, but before the darkness took him, Cedric looked at Myra and gasped for them to find the healing ointment and apply it immediately. Several days later, in a humble stable, Cedric finally drifted back to consciousness. Opening his eyes, he found Anna standing over him. His first question was whether this was the stable he had built for the kingdom, but Anna simply shook her head no. After driving off those beasts, the group moved to this new camp. This humble shed, it was built just for him. Alara told him to stay put while she went to tell everyone their lord was finally awake. Alaric stopped her immediately. He needed to know, how were Mina and Lucas? Alara told him they'd found Lucas clinging to life, but the man had recovered surprisingly fast. Ever since he regained consciousness, he'd been standing guard like a statue outside Alaric's door. But Mina, she was in much worse shape. Luckily, the king's royal elixir saved her life. As long as she kept resting, she'd pull through. Everyone else was safe and sound, too. Alaric felt a wave of relief, until Alara mentioned it had been 4 days since the battle. He jolted. Wait, what? 4 whole days? He checked his records. She wasn't kidding. 4 days were gone, leaving him with only 11 days left to finish the mission. Alara looked at him, confused. Her king was staring into empty air again, lost in thought. He tried to stand up, but his legs completely gave out. She begged him to rest, but Alaric wasn't having it. He told her he was fine and ordered her to summon Sir Barrett to the shed at once. She nodded and hurried out. Alone now, Alaric's mind raced. Without his strength to back them up, one slip-up and their entire mission would crumble instantly. Now that they had relocated to this new site, they needed a perimeter fence immediately. Later, they'd need heavy stone walls for real protection. When Barrett arrived, Alaric kept him outside the shed. He whispered secret instructions, orders that no one else was allowed to hear. Barrett left immediately to handle the job, but Alaric knew that wasn't enough. They couldn't afford a repeat of the last disaster. This time, everything had to be foolproof. Next, Alaric called for Lucas. He had another task for him. Lucas was ready, Alaric's order. Go out and harvest the bones and hide of the shadow behemoth king. And that hide, it had to stay perfect. Lucas was shocked when Alaric even handed over his own personal sword for the job. Once they left, Alara again told him he needed to sleep. He refused. He still needed to talk to her. He asked her to step inside so they could speak in private. Once she entered, Alaric explained why he'd sent the others away. He had a vital mission, one only she could handle. Alara agreed instantly, but then she started unbuttoning her tunic. She thought he wanted something a bit more romantic. Alaric panicked, yelling for her to put her clothes back on. Realizing her mistake, Alara turned absolutely bright red. He cleared things up quickly. He needed her to put on a performance. She was going to negotiate with the Grove Kingdom and persuade them to submit to Alaric's rule. Alara went tense. Would the powerful Grove Kingdom really just agree to join them? Alaric's eyes narrowed. That's exactly why they had to show pure, unadulterated strength, force them to surrender before they could even think. He chose Alara for 2 reasons. First, the Grove was ruled by women. She'd be able to communicate with them much better. And second, only she knew the truth, that Alaric was currently a broken man, his body wrecked from that final attack. The medicine was holding him together, but barely. Alara smiled, catching on. They were going to bluff the Grove Kingdom into submission. She knew exactly what to do. She told him to rest and leave the rest to her. She had this. A while later, Samuel and Alara were making their way toward the Grove Kingdom's territory. Samuel warned her, even if these people hated war, now was not the time to provoke them. Alara just nodded and kept moving. When they finally arrived, Samuel pointed toward a spring. The girls of the Grove were there, bathing in the sunlight. He identified their leader, the one they needed to meet. But before they could move, some Grove sentries spotted them. Moments later, Alara and Samuel were hauled before Lady Beatrice, ruler of the Grove Kingdom. The guards reported they'd caught the pair sneaking around, claiming to be envoys seeking an audience with their queen. Samuel tried to protest. They were ambassadors, but Beatrice just mocked them. Alara looked like a peasant, and their tribute of dried fish scraps wouldn't feed a child. Then she ordered her guards to drag Samuel away from her. Alara didn't flinch. She snapped back that she'd expected the queen to be smarter. Fine, that mountain of meat they brought, they'd just give it to the Bay Kingdom instead. That stopped Beatrice cold. She signaled her people to wait and told Alara to keep talking. A mountain of meat? She wanted details. Alara confirmed it, explaining they were talking about the massive shadow behemoths from the northern banks. Beatrice laughed. Did they want to team up and hunt the herd together? Alara just chuckled. Don't underestimate us. They hadn't come to hunt. They'd already slaughtered the entire herd. That river territory, it belonged to Alaric now. The women of the grove gasped. No way. Alara had to be lying. That same herd had nearly wiped out their own kingdom last season. Beatrice stood up, looming over them. Did Alara have any idea what happened to people who lied in her court? Alara didn't blink. She told her even the behemoth king fell to Alaric's blade. If Beatrice didn't believe her, she was welcome to come see the bodies herself. When a guard tried to warn her, Alara just laughed it off. She told them if their king wanted to, he could flatten the entire Grove kingdom in a day. Samuel backed her up. They weren't there to fight. They brought gifts and an invitation from their king. Why doubt their sincerity? Aurora snapped back, telling the scouts that if their queen was too terrified to face them herself, she could at least send someone to haul away the tribute meat. That sharp, dangerous edge in Aurora's voice made Lisa's party go stiff with tension. Still, the queen's envoy warned them, no games. A moment later, Aurora and Samuel led Lisa's group through the gates. Samuel announced their return with a shout, but Captain Ironwood barked at him to shut his trap and get back to building the new manors instead of making a scene. Hearing that, one of Lisa's handmaidens whispered, "Wait, what manors?" while Aurora officially informed Lord Cedric that the House of Willow Grove had arrived. The second Lisa saw Cedric, she froze. She felt a cold, murderous intent radiating off him, like she was standing before some ancient, legendary beast from the old world. In reality, Cedric had deliberately dressed in heavy pelts and trophies to look like a prehistoric monster. Pure intimidation. He told Aurora she'd done a great job, but his heavy presence only made Lisa more nervous. Suddenly, a rustle came from the thicket. It was Maria, Lancelot, and Arthur hiding in the shadows. Cedric had ordered all the wounded knights to stay out of sight, but Arthur admitted he was just dying to see what the famous Willow Grove queen actually looked like. Cedric officially thanked Lisa and her kin for accepting his request and traveling all the way to the edge of his territory. One of the Willow Grove girls didn't care for pleasantries. She demanded to know one thing: where was the meat? Cedric calmly pointed nearby. "Take as much as you can carry," he said. When they rounded the corner, they stopped dead, staring at a literal mountain of bison meat. Julian and Lucas were already busy carving the massive carcasses. When a Willow Grove girl stepped up to help, they warned her this beast's hide was incredibly tough. She tried to slice through it with her wooden pike, but the wood just snapped under the sheer strain. Lucas and Julian burst into laughter. The girls screamed, asking what was so funny and accusing them of only catching the beasts because the herd had been in chaos. Julian fired right back, asking if she actually wanted to fight about it. Suddenly, boom, Cedric's massive axe slammed into the dirt right between them. The Willow Grove girls scrambled back in pure terror. Argument over. Lisa was visibly shaken. She asked what kind of steel that was, knowing it was leagues beyond their primitive bone knives and ironwood branches. Cedric told her to use his great cleaver to finish cutting the meat for her clan. Julian grumbled that the girls were the ones who started the mess, but Cedric's gaze sharpened. "Do as you're told." Julian obeyed, muttering that the ladies got lucky today. Cedric promised Lisa he'd personally ensure she could take the tribute, without any further trouble from his men. He always kept his word. It was his knightly code. Nervously, Lisa asked how on earth he'd managed to conquer such a massive herd of beasts. Cedric's reply: whether she learned the truth through mutual trust or through painful personal experience depended entirely on what she did next. Then he ended the meeting. "Take the meat and leave." Lisa stared at him, calling him a cold-hearted man before turning away. Meanwhile, Cedric was panicking. That dramatic axe throw, definitely a bit much. Without his bandages, that stunt would have ripped his wound wide open. And then it happened. Blood started seeping through his tunic. Cedric immediately worried he was about to be exposed. Thankfully, Aurora distracted Lisa just in time, giving him a split second to hide the bleeding. Aurora mentioned they had advanced weapons to offer House Willow Grove, but Lisa turned her back and refused, saying such steel didn't suit her people. She warned Cedric that her clan had powerful weapons of their own, ones they hadn't shown yet. She only hoped they'd never have to use them. With that, Lisa ordered her people to load up what they could and retreat. Aurora added that if it wasn't enough, they could come back, but sooner was better since other clans were already waiting for their share. On the trek back, Lisa dropped the act. "Report on the investigation," she demanded. A few more hidden scouts appeared from the brush. Lisa had secretly stationed spies to watch the camp from the shadows. One scout, Maya, reported that the men were building houses, and they heard boars grunting inside. They were keeping livestock. Lisa was absolutely stunned. She couldn't believe Cedric had built such fine shelters just for animals. But Maya had more. Apparently, his clan had mastered the power of the Crimson Flame. Lisa snapped that it was impossible, but the scout insisted they'd seen fire, summoned from nothing just to roast meat. Maya hesitated before saying more, but Lisa's glare forced her to speak plainly. The scout then revealed that Cedric's entire clan was barely 10 people, including a few children and old men. Still, Maya suspected they were deliberately hiding their real numbers. Lisa was furious. Why hadn't they searched more carefully? Maya explained the nearby trees had been cleared away. Getting closer meant certain exposure. They had no choice but to watch from a distance. Lisa just said, "Okay." Then suddenly, crack, she lashed them with her whip. She warned that if they brought her more excuses next time, the punishment would be far worse than a few lashes. Maya bowed, thanking her for the mercy. Back at the camp, Cedric finally let out a breath as Aurora came over to check on his condition. Cedric admitted the battle with the herd had taken a heavy toll on him. He also noticed Aurora had a real gift for diplomacy. She leaned in, half teasing, asking whether, compared to the Queen of Willow Grove, he preferred her. Flustered, Caspian quickly told her not to get any ideas. He ordered allies to bring in the knights hidden outside to assist with his recovery, noting that Sir Lancelot would hold the gates until he was back on his feet. Allies nodded in agreement, then couldn't help but add that he looked absolutely legendary. That comment left Caspian red-faced and awkward. Just then, Simeon burst in, praising him for his brilliant performance. It turns out the spies from the Shadowwood Kingdom were exactly where Caspian predicted. Caspian didn't waste a second, asking if the secret mission was complete. Simeon grinned. It was a success. The Shadowwood scouts saw only the illusions Caspian wanted them to see, missing the real secrets entirely. Caspian offered a rare word of praise, and Simeon beamed with pride, acting like it was no big deal. He hurried off to help Gawain, and the others finish the new fortified lodges. Once he was gone, allies quietly asked if the Shadowwood clan would ever truly surrender. Caspian's gaze darkened. "Too early to say," he muttered. The game was only halfway over. But when the Shadowwood scouts returned for a second look, that's when the real trap would spring. Back in his private chambers, Caspian checked his status. Only 11 days left on the clock. Nowhere near enough time to fully recover his strength. He called upon the oracle to open the vault, only to find a single packet of salt and 1 jar of healing salve remaining. Then he saw it. His heavy axe had transformed into the primeval axe. Caspian froze. When did this happen? A wave of unease hit him, as he realized the upgrade must have triggered when he handed the weapon to Lancelot earlier that morning. He checked his tactical screen, and saw the spear's hidden ability had also awakened the moment he bled in that last duel. The Worldrender skill was powerful, but it required god-tier timing. Too early or too late, and it was useless. For a moment, he wondered if his other gear held secret powers, but he quickly shook the thought away. Every weapon had its own mystery. Best to leave those secrets to destiny for now. He scanned his inventory one last time. That healing salve was down to the last drop. He'd have to save it for a life-or-death moment. If things went south, he'd have to rely on the primeval axe to hunt whatever monsters lurked in the woods. The rations taken by the Shadowwood spies would only last 2 days. With the deadline looming, he needed Simeon back. He ordered Lancelot to summon the scout immediately. There was more work to be done. A few moments later, Simeon arrived, eager for his next command. Caspian reminded him of the great ebony bulls they had driven off, ordering him to track them down within 48 hours and report their position. Simeon didn't hesitate, shouting his promise to find the beasts before vanishing into the forest. Watching his people work so hard, Caspian decided to prepare special rewards for the house. While Simeon hunted the bulls, Caspian spent his time crafting gifts. 2 days flew by. He checked the oracle's screen. Only 9 days remained to finish the mission. On the bright side, he earned a stack of legacy points for crafting a flint spearhead, a silver bone whistle, and an oxhorn canteen. He planned to give the whistle to Gawain to help him coordinate the troops during the heat of battle. The flint spearheads would turn their wooden pikes into lethal weapons if the Shadowwood clan turned hostile. And the horn canteen, that was for Simeon. Then Ali's arrived with a smile. The lodges were finally complete. Caspian stood up, ready to inspect their new home. At the sight, Gawain proudly gestured to the stone and timber structures, shouting to the crowd about how grand they looked. Honestly, Caspian thought they were a bit rough, but he gave a firm nod of approval. The tribe erupted in cheers. Finally, they were no longer living like animals in the dirt. But even amidst the celebration, Caspian felt the pressure building. Gawain hauled the final thatched door into place, sealing the entrance and finishing the work. Immediately, Caspian gained 10 legacy points for the construction. Looking around, he realized the tribe had transformed completely since he arrived. At the start, they were little more than wild men, surviving on raw meat and basic instincts. Now, they carried themselves with purpose. Their intelligence was evolving right before his eyes. He wondered if the oracle was literally force-speeding their evolution. He told them to alert him the moment Simeon returned and headed back to rest. Before long, Simeon came sprinting into the camp, yelling that he'd found the herd. Caspian praised the scout, then announced that the second phase of the plan was a go. He gathered the men and pulled Gawain aside for a private word. Minutes later, Caspian finished laying out the strategy. "Any questions?" he asked, his voice low and serious. Gawain looked nervous, questioning if the risk was worth it. Simeon just clapped him on the shoulder and told him to relax. Simeon would take the lead on the dangerous part. Gawain just had to make sure the men were ready to move. Caspian handed Gawain the silver whistle, promising it would make his job easier, then told Simeon his own gift was waiting for him after the mission. Simeon was hyped. Caspian smiled, giving them one final warning. Once the signal went up, they had to strike without mercy. With their orders clear, Simeon, Gawain, and Lancelot led the men out into the shadows to finish the job. Lord Alistair was feeling the pressure. His garrison was spread thin, leaving him no choice but to push even the wounded soldiers back into service. Desperate times, right? He ordered Alara to have Mary and Lucas prep a massive pyre in front of the manor, but gave strict orders. Do not light it yet. Alara looked at him curious. "Is this for our royal guests?" she asked. "Exactly," Alistair replied. But inside, he was praying the trap he'd set 2 days ago would actually snap shut. Suddenly, a scout burst in. The Thorn raiders were already at the gates. She was breathless. "The House of Thorn, they're here, my lord." Before the chaos, Alistair had been enjoying a quiet moment. Alara was tending to his wounds, and honestly, he was loving the royal treatment. He even caught himself daydreaming. Once he brought the Thorn raiders to heal, he'd have both Isabella and Alara attending to his every whim. A man can dream, right? The moment the visitors arrived, Alara stepped out to play the host. She greeted the Duchess, Isabella, inviting her into the palace where their king was waiting. "Palace," Isabella was floored. Just days ago, this was a pile of sticks. Now it was a refined wooden manor. How did they build this so fast? She couldn't stop staring. The sheer speed of Alistair's progress was unnatural. Isabella recovered quickly, flashing a sharp smile. "Is your king too scared to face me?" she mocked, before adding that they were here for another contribution of meat to settle their debts. She gestured to the armed knights behind her. My men wanted to meet their new neighbors. Hope they don't rattle your people too much. Alara didn't blink. She just laughed. Funny you say that. Our lord already prepared 40 full portions of meat just for you. Then she leaned in, eyes scanning the small group. Though, looking at your numbers, you didn't even bring 40 men to carry it. Isabella's eyes narrowed. If you're so concerned, why not join a real house? I could use a girl like you by my side. Alara gave a polite nod. I appreciate the offer, Duchess, but my heart was won over by my king's strength a long time ago. A total shutdown. She led them to the storehouse, telling them that if they couldn't carry the loot, they were welcome to feast right there on the spot. And don't worry about the heavy lifting, Alara added with a smirk. If the carving is too much for you, our knights can help. Isabella told her soldiers to eat and keep their cool. She had a king to deal with. When she stepped inside, Alastair greeted her with that effortless charm. Seeing him sitting there, looking so refined in his new hall, it actually made her flush. She kept her guard up, though. Quite the place you've built, she admitted, trying to sound unimpressed. Is this really yours? Alastair saw the spark of interest and decided to lean into it. This, he waved a hand dismissively, just a temporary hunting lodge. Once the stone citadel is finished, I'm giving this house to my commoners. Isabella froze, giving a house this grand. To peasants, she couldn't believe it. Alastair just shrugged. It was rough for now, sure, but he promised his people would soon live in stone keeps that would rival the capital. Then, bam, out of nowhere, Isabella lashed out with her whip, binding Alastair tight and pulling him close. What's the meaning of this? He hissed, heart racing. Isabella purred in his ear. I know men, Alastair, and I know exactly how to make you hand over those secret inventions of yours. She looked him dead in the eye, wondering if this little display would be enough to break his resolve. It was, a lot. Alastair's pulse was pounding, but he kept a stone face and laughed. You think a bit of leather is enough to make me fold? You really think I don't have a backup plan? Total bluff. Inside, he was panicking. He had zero backup, things were spiraling, and with his injuries, he couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag. Luck was on his side, though. Alara walked in at the perfect moment. My lord, the feast is served. She stopped dead when she saw the two of them tied up like that. My lord, she blurted out. Surely this isn't the time for those activities. Isabella pulled back, eyes flashing. Alastair just exhaled. Right, enough talk. Let's go out and get the roast started. He asked Alara if the fire was ready. Meanwhile, Isabella was spiraling. Was he really that calm, or was it all a mask? He was nothing like the men she knew. His composure, it was on a completely different level. Outside, the atmosphere shifted. The Thorn girls were already cheering, shouting to Isabella that the meat smelled absolutely heavenly. Alastair pulled out a small pouch of rare salt and handed it to Alara. Spread it around, he whispered. Tell them it's the royal spice. Isabella snapped instantly. What are you putting on that food? She demanded, suspicious of the white powder. Alara just smirked. If you're too scared to eat, Duchess, then don't. But the moment Isabella saw her own knights' faces light up with pure joy, she knew she had to try it. Alastair watched them feast, a satisfied grin on his face. Keep eating, ladies. Every second you're distracted gives Samuel and Gawain more time to finish the real work. Miles away, Captain Gawain and the scouts were positioned near the great beasts. One soldier, Leo, asked why they were hunting again when the larders were full. We're not hunting, kid, Gawain growled. Stop asking questions and just follow the damn plan. Then the signal came from the ridge. Now! They hurled their heavy javelins into the herd, sending the massive aurochs into a blind, thundering stampede. Gawain roared at Sir Samuel as the beasts charged. They're coming right at you, Sam. Samuel didn't flinch. He dropped from the branches like a shadow, driving his blade into the lead bull's neck. Got him, Samuel yelled as he rolled to safety. The beast was theirs. The wounded aurochs was thrashing wildly now, leading the herd in a panicked frenzy. Samuel gripped his weapon, eyes sharp. This was it. The chaos was officially unleashed. From the ridgeline, Harold spotted the herd pivoting east. Sir Alaric signaled Samuel immediately. The The beasts were heading the wrong way. Samuel yanked the bull's reins hard, forcing the stampede west instead. Cut to Lord Arthur's manor, where the ladies of House Willow were dining in total peace. Arthur was waiting for the signal when suddenly, a scout from Willow Watch came sprinting toward the gates, breathless and pale. Lady Elizabeth rushed to her, demanding to know what happened. Through frantic tears, the girls sobbed that a pack of crazed obsidian bulls had stormed their camp, crushing everything in their path. Their guards stood no chance. Elizabeth bolted upright, ordering her knights to mount up. She swore right then those beasts would pay in blood. But inside, she was trembling. House Willow always avoided the obsidian bulls, so why were they attacking now? Over at the Willow camp, it was pure chaos. The girls fired their crossbows, but the bolts just bounced off the monsters' thick hides. With no other choice, they drew their blades and charged into the fray to save their sisters trapped in the wreckage. One girl leaped down only to be cornered by a massive bull, but just in time, Elizabeth arrived, snagging its leg with her whip. The girls let out a cheer at the sight of their leader. Elizabeth glared at the beasts, furious they dared touch her people. She brought one down, but it wasn't enough. The beast surged back up, goring forward and throwing Elizabeth through the air, her whip spinning away. Before she hit the dirt, Arthur appeared out of nowhere and caught her. "Easy now," he asked. "You still with me?" Elizabeth, frustrated but standing her ground, nodded. She just couldn't wrap her head around why these bulls were suddenly here. Tucked away nearby, Harold, Samuel, and Alaric awkwardly looked away. Yeah, they were the ones who'd started this mess. Arthur turned his gaze to the herd and barked a command, asking the beasts if they'd already forgotten the scars he gave them. The bulls roared, moving closer, and for a second Arthur tensed. Was the cloak made from their old king's hide not enough to scare them? Then, to his massive relief, the lead bull started backing off. Arthur laughed, shouting that it looked like the herd had a new king. He mocked the beast, calling it weaker than the last one, then declared that since they were here, they belonged to him now. On his command, Arthur's knights charged the herd. Alaric yelled at Samuel to keep his eyes on the lead bull. With a boost from Alaric, Samuel vaulted onto the beast's back, fighting to break its spirit. Arthur watched, impressed. The kid was a natural rider. As the men worked to break the herd, Arthur told Elizabeth to retreat, but she refused. The bulls hadn't scattered yet. Arthur grabbed her arm, warning her that she couldn't handle these monsters in her current state. "We're outnumbered," he argued. "Charging in now is just a death wish." Elizabeth went silent, unable to find an answer. Arthur asked again, why not bring her people to his fortress? They could heal there and plan a proper strike to retake their land. He offered them grain, walls, and protection. Audrey stepped in too, telling Elizabeth to actually look at her wounded soldiers. They were broken and exhausted. Did Elizabeth really want to watch them throw their lives away for a pile of ruins? Finally, Elizabeth gave the word. House Willow would gather their wounded and retreat north to Arthur's stronghold. A knight named Alice flared up at the order, but she wouldn't defy her lady. She signaled the survivors to follow Arthur's men. Arthur put Audrey in charge of the caravan's safety. She gave a sharp nod, and they began the long trek. Meanwhile, Alaric and the boys kept the bulls busy. Alice dove back into the fight, but Alaric told her to back off if she was scared. Alice ignored the jab and kept swinging anyway. Arthur told Alaric to pipe down and just focus on finishing the job. He had to admit, those girls had spirit. By sunset, the entire group finally made it back to Arthur's camp. A girl named Marian from Arthur's side met them at the gate, relieved to see everyone had returned in one piece. When she asked where the men were, Alice explained they stayed behind to hold the line while the injured escaped. Marian told the House Willow girls they could move into the new houses they'd just finished. She let out a long sigh, thinking about how lucky it was they'd pushed through their own exhaustion to get those buildings ready. Later that night, Audrey told Elizabeth that everyone was fed and the wounded were stable. The crisis was over for now. She urged the lady to finally get some sleep. Elizabeth gave a quiet, tired thanks as the weight of the day hit her. Audrey stepped outside, exhaling in relief. It was all going exactly like Arthur said it would. His whole plan was about bringing House Willow under his banner without a drop of wasted blood. After the last war, they couldn't afford more losses. Now only the final move remained. The next morning, Marion caught up with Hugh to ask if the night had stayed quiet. Hugh nodded, rubbing his eyes. He'd been on watch until dawn and nothing had moved. Audrey was standing guard at Elizabeth's door when a shadow stretched across the floor. She looked up and saw Marion approaching. Audrey asked what she wanted. Marion's face was serious. The king has summoned Lady Elizabeth to the palace to discuss their future. The scene cuts to Arthur. He was busy checking his status screen, feeling out his new powers, when Lady Alara suddenly showed up to see him. Straight to the point, Alara told him that the rumors were true. She'd heard the proposal to merge their noble houses, and her answer was a flat no. She just couldn't bring herself to agree to it. She threw down a warning, telling Arthur not to think he could just bully her into submission just because House Willowbrook was currently at its weakest point. But Arthur, he played it cool, telling her he wasn't forcing anyone. This wasn't a threat, it was a trade. He offered her the secrets of advanced architecture, superior steel forging, and the mastery of fire starting. The price, House Willowbrook would have to merge with his own territory. He asked her one more time, join him, and stay safe under his personal protection. Arthur stepped closer, his voice dropping. He told her straight up, in this world, having courage alone just isn't enough to survive. He reminded her that she knew the savagery of the Blackwater Knights and the sheer might of the Iron Mountain Lords better than anyone. Right now, he said, she was like a wounded fawn, and it wouldn't be long before the wolves smelled blood and came for the kill. Frustrated and backed into a corner, Alara finally snapped and told him to just shut up. Look, she knew the situation was bad, but it wasn't that simple. She explained that she couldn't just force the proud women of Willowbrook to bow down and submit to his rule. Alara challenged him one last time, asking if he was actually ready to back up his talk. Arthur just gave a confident smirk and agreed. Once they were outside, Arthur addressed the warriors of House Willowbrook. Since their lady was injured and couldn't duel, he declared that out of fairness, he wouldn't draw his sword either. Instead, Arthur made a bold move. He announced that Sir Gawain would fight in his place. Gawain let out a rough laugh, asking who among them was brave enough to face him. Seraphina stepped forward immediately, eyes blazing, and accepted the challenge. Gawain grinned, warning her not to get embarrassed when he beat her. Seraphina didn't miss a beat, telling him he'd better watch out for her signature eagle bone blade. The duel exploded into action. Seraphina lunged, hurling a bone knife straight at Gawain. He started to laugh it off, but then his heart stopped. He realized Arthur was standing directly behind him. If he dodged, Arthur was a dead man. Gawain had no choice. He raised his heavy axe and took the hit to block the first blade. But he wasn't fast enough for the second. It hissed through the air and scraped right across his helmet. The wound wasn't deep, but oh man, he was pissed. Enraged, Gawain lost his cool and charged Seraphina with pure, brutal force. Seraphina was about to be overwhelmed when, out of nowhere, another girl from House Willowbrook leaped from the crowd and threw a hidden knife at Gawain's helm. In that split second of distraction, Seraphina swept his legs out from under him. Gawain hit the dirt, screaming that he'd been ambushed and the whole duel was a rigged mess. As he crashed down, Seraphina grabbed a knife and lunged straight for Arthur's throat. But Arthur, he didn't even blink. He'd already planned for this, assigning the marksman Kaelin to be his shadow. Hidden high on the palace roof, Kaelin let fly a heavy spear, intercepting Seraphina just in time to shield his lord. The impact of the spear sent Seraphina crashing to the ground. Instantly, the Willowbrook girls rushed to her side, screaming at Arthur in a total fit of rage. They went wild, accusing him of being a dirty cheater and luring them into his kingdom just to trap them in a sick scheme. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife as Gawain and Seraphina both braced for a bloodbath. The girls begged Alara for the order to attack, swearing they could wipe everyone in the courtyard out right then and there. Arthur felt the sweat on his neck, even he was getting tense now. A literal assassination attempt definitely wasn't in the playbook. He started wondering if the Willowbrook girls were trying to start a full-scale war, and whether Alara had ordered the hit or was just as shocked as he was. If the queen had called for his head, he realized he could use her as a hostage to escape. But then, something unexpected happened. Alara stepped in and angrily ordered her people to stand down. She screamed at them, asking if they really thought their pathetic little plot could fool her. She told them flat out that she'd never allow allies who had helped them to be treated with such absolute dishonor. Alara made it clear she wasn't going to hunt down whoever started the assassination plot. But a loss was a loss. The duel was over. Then she turned to Arthur, explaining that Seraphina was Willowbrook's bravest and most loyal knight. She told him that Seraphina only threw away her pride and resorted to such tactics because she cared so much for her people. Alara acknowledged that Arthur had powers that seemed almost godlike, miraculous even. So she swallowed her pride and asked him, could he be merciful enough to spare the warrior's life? If he did, she promised House Willowbrook would be in his debt forever. Arthur kept his face like stone, but inside, he was breathing a massive sigh of relief. This wasn't the disaster it could have been. In fact, he finally had total control of the situation again. Thinking of his rare alchemical salve, he told Alara to relax. Seraphina wasn't going to die. After all, they were officially allies now. One of the girls panicked, urging Arthur to move faster. Seraphina was fading out, and fast. As he went to help, Arthur decided he'd let the assassination attempt slide for the sake of the bigger picture. But hey, she still tried to kill him, and that couldn't go completely unpunished. So he used only a tiny bit of the medicine, just enough to keep her from crossing the pearly gates, but not enough to heal her fully. He made sure to save the rest of the precious ointment for his own future wounds. After patching her up, he told the others to carry her back to their quarters, assuring them she'd be back on her feet in a few days. Seeing that miracle with their own eyes, the Willowbrook girls started praising Arthur like he was some kind of saint. Arthur walked over, put his arm around Alara, and asked if her people were ready to join his tribe now. Her face flushed with a mix of relief and happiness, and she finally gave him the answer he wanted. Yes. Smiling, Arthur told Alara she could keep leading her people as their lady, as long as they followed his ultimate command. But then, Alara said she had one final request. She told him Arthur needed to become her official partner, and they should hold a grand ceremony to make the union permanent. Hearing that, Arthur's face turned bright red with pure delight. To him, it felt like the greatest prize imaginable had just dropped right into his lap. His mind immediately raced through the future. The wedding, the exchange of rings, the royal bridal chamber, raising a daughter together, watching her grow, getting old by Alara's side, and finally leaving this world together hand in hand. Alistair started making some seriously weird faces, and Alara caught him. She got all nervous. Was he actually regretting their union rite? No way. Alistair quickly played it cool, pulled her into a tight hug, and told her to focus on healing. He needed time to prepare, or so he said. He cleared the room, telling his people to get some rest. The big ceremony was only a few days away. That's when the Chronicle chimed in. His settlement was officially recognized. Now it just needed a name. But wait, he checked the roster, 46 people. He was short by 4. Where the hell were they? He dubbed it New Avalon. Then his mind started racing. If he raided the River Wraiths, could he just draft their survivors? He wasn't sure if forced captives would even count toward his population goal. Just then, he caught some girls from House Hawthorne gossiping. They used to love Alistair's smile, but now, they said he'd end up just like the Duchess's previous consorts. Sliced into pieces during the ritual, and then, get this, served for dinner. Alistair went absolutely cold. The Duchess was a man-eater, literally. Suddenly, it made sense why House Hawthorne had almost no men left. Someone grabbed him from behind, and he actually shrieked, begging for his life. It was just Beatrice. She looked at him like he'd lost his mind. Still shaking, he asked what she wanted. She just sneered. Did he really want to be that rude Alara's husband? Alistair admitted he was having some major second thoughts. D jumped into this way too fast. Beatrice's eyes lit up. Alistair sighed. He thought he was marrying a noble lady, but it turned out she was more like a black widow spider. Beatrice started celebrating right then and there, until Sir Thomas cut in, asking why she wasn't in bed resting. Blushing hard, Beatrice confessed she just wanted to be near Alistair, but he wasn't feeling it. He told her he needed space and suggested the Hawthorne girls help build the new barracks instead. Thomas nodded and started dragging her back to the tents. Even as she was pulled away, Beatrice kept yelling for him to choose her instead. Alistair knew he had to have a talk with Alara. Next morning, things were actually looking up. Everyone was working together, and the Hawthorne clan was actually helping build the new houses. He headed toward the temporary camp, near the fields where the newcomers were staying. Lady Anne greeted him at the gate. "Looking for the Duchess?" she asked. "She's down by the river." Anne called out that the Lord had arrived, and Alara dismissed her guards immediately. Once they were alone, she asked if there was some kind of emergency. Not really. Alistair told her he was just checking on her recovery. She told him she'd be back at full strength in 2 or 3 days. Then, she gave him a look. Did he want to start their romance a little early? Alistair nearly jumped out of his skin. He pivoted fast and asked what her real name was. She told him, just Alara. It was a name given to her by the former Duchess, but no one had dared use it since she was cast out. That didn't help. Alistair felt even worse, obey her or be exiled. He might as well rename the settlement the Spider's Web. He cautiously asked about the former Duchess's consorts. Where were they now? Alara didn't blink. They were all eaten. It was tradition. In her house, the duchesses consumed their partners to absorb their strength. Alistair was ready to run for the hills, but then she dropped a bombshell. She thought that custom was gross and had no intention of doing it. He finally exhaled. He asked if she'd ever. You know, she laughed. She'd just become Duchess and never had a husband, so she never had the chance. Feeling slightly safer, Alistair said his goodbyes and went to prep for the big day. On the walk back, he figured if he wasn't going to be a snack, maybe he could still keep Beatrice as a backup option. But then Alara yelled after him. She wouldn't eat him, sure, but if he ever betrayed her, she'd make him pray for death. A bit later, Alistair walked through the village, watching the progress. Suddenly, it hit him. Only 7 days left to finish his mission. He needed those prisoners now. He told Sir Cedric he was heading out. Cedric was left in charge of the labor. If things got crazy, he was to send a messenger to the South Shore immediately. Alistair reached the beach and what he saw, absolutely horrifying. He couldn't believe his eyes. Had the river wraiths been completely slaughtered? Coastal birds were picking at the bodies, which meant the area was clear for now. He checked the corpses, still warm, no rot. This massacre had happened just a few hours ago. Then he noticed the wounds, jagged claw marks, and the victims had those same sharp claws. Did these lunatics just turn on each other? He had to find survivors, fast. He found one body with 0 wounds, but his face was twisted in pure, agonizing terror, as Alistair tried to solve the mystery. Sam burst through the trees, screaming his head off. The river wraiths were attacking their base. Hearing the news, Alaric turned and sprinted back toward the outpost. Back at the walls, Sir Roland was barking orders. Everyone close, swords out, prepare for the bloodiest of close-range grinds. They rained down wooden javelins, but the Blackwood madmen didn't even flinch. As the horde pressed in, Roland kept his cool. "Stay steady," he roared. "Fight with everything you've got." One rule: do not, under any circumstances, let them drag you into that water. If you go under, you're dead. Period. The marauders charged, a wall of madness, but a hail of stones broke their momentum just as Duchess Alina's cavalry thundered onto the field. Alina didn't waste time. She demanded answers from Roland. Were these the Blackwood enemies they'd heard of? And why on earth were border trash raiding this far into their territory? Roland could only shake his head. He had no clue. These lunatics just rose from the great river like ghosts and stormed the gates like men possessed. Then, Pure, brutal chaos as the two sides collided. Alina threw herself into the fray alongside the Sterling Guard. She tried to demand a parley, but the marauders gave nothing back, no words, just empty eyes. That's when she knew these weren't men anymore. While Alina was busy parrying a blade, a massive brute tried to take her head off from the side. Alaric lunged in, swinging his steel with everything he had, but the monster just tanked the hit like it was nothing. Alaric was floored. Two more marauders went for Alaric's throat, but Julian and Cedric cut through the noise, parrying the blades and slamming the attackers into the dirt. They stood their ground, issuing a clear warning. "If you want our lord, you'll have to step over our corpses first." Alaric gave his boys a nod of approval. "Good, now handle the small fry." He turned to Alina, asking her to cover his men while he dealt with the titans standing before him. Alina didn't hesitate. She vanished into the crowd to help. Alaric took a breath and shouted to his soldiers, "Hold the line. I'm counting on you until this monster is dealt with." He looked the massive lunatic in the eye. "I don't know what happened to your house, but we had nothing to do with it. You're fighting the wrong people." Zero response, just another savage attack. Alaric tensed up, screaming, "Can you even understand me? Have you lost your damn tongue?" He was internally reeling from the brute's sheer, explosive power, wondering, how is a man supposed to fight this? This guy was faster and stronger than any knight he'd ever seen. Against this monster, Alaric felt as fragile as glass. To make things worse, with his own men packed so tight around him, he couldn't risk unleashing his greatsword's hidden magic. That split second of hesitation cost him. Alaric lost the rhythm, and the brute's teeth clamped down hard on his hand. Pure luck. He jerked back just in time because his wolf-hide cloak caught the bite. Without that thick leather, his left hand would have been ripped right off the wrist. The monster grew even more feral, charging Alaric with terrifying speed. Alaric barely twisted away, but the brute managed to shred the cloak right off his shoulders. Alaric felt a chill run down his spine. How could it be that fast? If he hadn't slipped out of that cloak, he'd be a dead man. But then something strange happened. The brute stopped mid-charge. It just froze. A second later, it actually backed away. Alaric's instincts flared. The massive lunatic hadn't wanted him. It had only gone for the blood-stained sections of his cloak. He scanned the battlefield and realized Lady Alara was the only one completely swarmed by the Blackwood mob. The realization hit him like a lightning bolt. They were tracking the scent of blood. They were operating on pure animal instinct. And Alaric, he was going to use that. Right then, Thomas hurried over, asking for the Lord's next command. Alaric's order was bizarre. "Take 2 men and bring me 3 piglets from the pen." Thomas just stared. "My lord, those are our winter stores." Alaric didn't have time for a debate. "Just do it, now." He was fuming inside. The Blackwood dogs were forcing him to waste precious livestock, and he'd make them pay for every ounce of meat later. He then yelled for Alina to pull all the bleeding soldiers out of the line. Moments later, Thomas returned with the squealing piglets. Alaric pointed toward the river. "Release them, now." The second they hit the ground, the terrified animals bolted straight for the water, looking for a place to hide. But Cedric was waiting. He let fly a volley of javelins, wounding the piglets. The scent hit the air, and instantly, every single Blackwood marauder turned and sprinted toward the poor creatures, ripping them apart in a frenzy. While the monsters were distracted by the feast, Alaric ordered his men to coat their blades in paralytic herbs, aim for the limbs, not the heart. But then Cedric called out. The marauders were acting weird again. Alaric looked over and gasped. The lunatics weren't fighting back. They were twitching violently before collapsing into the dirt, one by one. Alaric rounded on Thomas. "Did you poison that meat?" Thomas shook his head frantically. "No, my lord, I swear." That only made Alaric more nervous. He signaled everyone to keep their distance and stay on high alert. He couldn't wrap his head around what was happening to these people or why they were dropping. Fast forward a bit, and the Sterling Guard had every surviving marauder locked behind iron bars in the dungeon. Lady Alara paced the halls, telling the guards to keep their hands on their hilts in case the prisoners woke up hungry. When the Blackwood captives finally opened their eyes, the screaming started, but they weren't attacking. They were begging. Alara immediately sent a page to find Lord Alaric. When Alaric arrived at the cells, he didn't find monsters. He found broken men and women, all of them desperately crying out for a single drop of water. Alastair first asked Lady Alara where Sir Gareth, the leader of House Bayard, was being held. She explained he'd been completely isolated from his men. When Alastair reached Gareth's cage, the knight was desperate, begging for just a drop of water. Alastair obliged, splashing some from a bottle onto the broken man. He asked if Gareth could understand his words, and once the knight nodded, Alastair handed the interrogation over to Alara. Alara gave Gareth a full drink, telling him to take all he needed. Gareth, showing his true colors, pleaded for his men to be given water too. Alara assured him they'd all be cared for, then cut straight to the point. Was he ready to talk? Gareth tensed up, demanding to know why their clan had been slaughtered for no reason. He'd heard rumors the Iron Crag clan were strange, but this was beyond bizarre. Alara paused, asking if he truly believed they were the Iron Crag Knights. Gareth looked absolutely stunned. No one had ever told him Alastair's people weren't the Iron Crags. Alara cleared the air. They were the New Haven settlers, and Alastair was their king. Gareth shook his head. He'd never heard of any New Haven kingdom. He assumed the Iron Crags must have driven them into this distant wilderness. Alara corrected him once more. Gareth was in that cage because he'd attacked their territory, and New Haven had never even met the Iron Crag clan. It was House Bayard that had charged in like rabid beasts. Gareth refused to believe it, claiming he had no memory of such madness. So Alara asked him to start from the beginning. What did he actually remember? Gareth explained that his house had been living peacefully near the southern reach, passing time with their usual sparring and games. Then everything changed. A child ran to him in tears, crying that someone had stolen his favorite pet hawk. Gareth told the boy to man up and fight for his things, thinking it was just a petty internal squabble, but the child screamed that weird people had taken it. When Gareth looked up, his blood ran cold. The Iron Crag Knights were standing right there. Furious, he demanded to know why they'd trespassed on his land. The Iron Crag leader didn't say a word. He just gave the signal, and his men fell upon House Bayard like a storm. Gareth was blindsided. He couldn't wrap his head around why an unprovoked ambush was happening to his people. He was knocked unconscious during the slaughter and woke up behind the bars of a New Haven cage. Alastair then dropped the hammer. He'd visited Gareth's village, and it was a graveyard. No one was left. If Alastair hadn't spared the few survivors here, House Bayard would have been wiped from history. Hearing that, Gareth collapsed. The weight of failing his people was enough to crush his very soul. Suddenly, a strange leaf fell from Gareth's tattered cloak. Alara snatched it up and showed it to Alastair. Alastair examined the leaf through his system, identifying it as maddening leaf, a toxic herb used to dull pain and trigger violent hallucinations. The discovery sent a chill down Alastair's spine. Was the Iron Crag clan really using chemical warfare? While the settlement worked to hydrate the prisoners, Alastair searched the other Bayard men. The same leaf was hidden on every single one of them. He recalled a rumor that the Iron Crag leader had attained divine power. But looking at this evidence, it didn't look like a god's work. It looked like pure, calculated evil. Alastair realized the maddening leaf had driven House Bayard to turn on anyone in their path. The Iron Crags had clearly staged this. A mad assault on New Haven territory was no coincidence. If they'd sent Gareth's men here to cause chaos and die, it meant the New Haven kingdom was already on their radar. Even a man like Gareth, with his incredible raw strength, had been turned into a mindless puppet. The Iron Crag clan was a massive threat. Alastair checked his stats and frowned. 3 points of strength wouldn't cut it. He needed a serious level up before the real enemy arrived. Alara approached, warning that Gareth was on the verge of a complete mental breakdown. If he snapped, they'd lose their only source of info. Alastair shook his head. They didn't have time for him to recover. The next strike could come at any second. Alara's eyes widened. Do you think the Iron Crags are planning to siege our base? Alistair explained that while it was complicated, he was certain the Iron Crags were using the maddening leaf to mind control their enemies. He warned that they were walking into the unknown. They had to trigger Gareth's memory fast. Then, he turned to Sir Roland, telling him to stop carrying the guilt. Against the toxic smoke of the maddening leaf, raw strength and knightly valor meant absolutely nothing. Alistair held the leaf in front of Gareth's face. The moment the knight saw it, his eyes clouded. That smell, it was familiar. He remembered catching a whiff of it while fighting those Iron Crag bastards, though it had been buried under the scent of blood and sweat. A sharp, disgusting odor. That confirmation made Alistair's jaw tighten. He wondered if they were using other poisons too. They needed to master the knowledge of these herbs before they even thought about a counterattack. Gareth looked up, his eyes burning. Do you plan to hunt the Iron Crags, King Alistair, because House Bayard wants blood? If he didn't get his vengeance for his fallen brothers, Gareth knew he would never find peace in this life. The rest of the Baywood survivors roared for blood. They wanted justice, and they were willing to pay any price to get it. Lord Alaric watched them, calculating. He still needed more souls for his grand quest, but with these warriors, he was only 4 short of the goal. Suddenly, Hector cut through his thoughts, pointing out their unique gift. Their senses were razor-sharp. They could track rare herbs by scent alone, which would be a massive win for Alaric's plans. Alaric's expression darkened. That's exactly what's bothering me, he admitted. See, those keen noses were a double-edged sword. Sure, they could find plants, but their sensitivity to blood. If the Baywood men lost control again, it would be an absolute bloodbath for everyone. Hector didn't back down. He shouted that as long as that cursed poisonous smoke wasn't in the air, they could keep their inner demons in check. Alaric nodded. The real threat was the Iron Peak clan. But he had to know, what if the smoke returned? Hector's face fell as he gave a heavy answer. If it came to that, they'd simply refuse to take the field. Alaric looked him in the eye. He understood the hunger for payback, but he warned them that blind hatred wasn't going to win this war. He also dropped a truth bomb. Lord Thorne might not be on board with Hector's reckless plans. Hector didn't flinch. We're all that's left of House Bay, he whispered. Avenge our kin and our lives belong to you. Fine, Alaric declared. Swear your swords to House Valerius and join our ranks, and I'll give you the vengeance you crave. But there was a catch. He made it crystal clear. Not every survivor would be getting their hands dirty on the front lines. Alaric threw the question back at him. Do we have a deal? Without a second's hesitation, the entire Baywood crew roared their acceptance. As Alaric turned to walk away, Hector called out one last time. Alaric got the hint and signaled Alara and Aloin to unlock the cages immediately. They weren't prisoners anymore, they were allies. And just like that, the system pinged. Tribe mission complete. Talk about a haul. Because he cleared it in under 7 days, Alaric scored 3 attribute points, a massive material crate, a heritage plaque, and even a surprise gift pack. Finally, he could breathe. Quest, done, points. He dumped all 3 straight into strength without thinking twice. The moment he confirmed it, boom, a literal wave of raw power ripped through his entire body. He could feel the energy surging under his skin. When the dust settled, his hair had actually grown longer. Weird side effect, right? But hey, small price to pay for that kind of boost. Next up, the loot. He cracked open the material crate and found, get this, a full ton of hematite. Alaric was ecstatic. This meant they could completely skip the Bronze Age and march straight into the Age of Iron. Then came the mystery gift. He was hoping for a win, and he got one, 3 jars of high-grade hematic ointment. This was way better than his last reward. All right, system, he muttered, show me the heritage plaque. It was a civilization item. The only catch, it would cost him 10 technology points just to identify the thing. He didn't blink. He spent the points and the reveal came through, the sense of modesty plaque. At first glance, it seemed small, but Alaric knew better. This was a massive step for their culture's growth. Honestly, he was just relieved he wouldn't have to deal with men and women bathing together anymore. No way he wanted anyone catching a glimpse of Lady Isabella at the river. With that settled, he shifted back to the real headache: how to take down the Iron Peak clan. Right then, Alara walked in and just stopped. She was floored. Alaric was taller, broader, and absolutely ripped compared to before. He just brushed it off and asked what was up. She tentatively asked if he wanted her to go negotiate with Iron Peak, maybe clear up the misunderstanding. Alaric just shook his head. "There's no misunderstanding," he said coldly. "Those bastards have already decided we need to be erased." He labeled them the deadliest threat House Valerius had ever faced. They were the type to play everyone against each other and watch the world burn for a profit. Alara could barely hide the terror in her eyes as she asked what the plan was. Alaric was realistic. For now, they fortify the walls, stockpile every scrap of food, and do not poke the bear until they're actually ready to fight. Bottom line, they had to play it smart, hide their fangs, and wait for the perfect moment to strike. Arya then asked how to handle the 22 newcomers. Alaric's orders were sharp: split the Baywood survivors into 3 specialized squads. Group 1 for building houses, Group 2 for foraging, and Group 3 for traps. Alara looked totally lost. "Traps?" she asked. "What for?" Alaric kept it simple. Traps were the silent guardians of their territory. They could snag enemies or dangerous beasts alive, giving the tribe a massive defensive edge. Then, he gave Arya another urgent mission. With all these new mouths to feed, they couldn't just wing it anymore. Wasting meat wasn't an option. The solution: everyone was going to learn the art of making jerky, and they were starting today. When Baron Flint arrived, he couldn't help but stare at Alaric's new, massive frame. Alaric told him to snap out of it. There was work to do. He ordered Flint to start rigging the surrounding mountains with traps. The more, the better. He wanted that terrain to be a nightmare to walk through. Alaric had already picked out the team and promised to teach them the first design himself, but he emphasized one thing: building them was the easy part. The real challenge: memorizing where every single one of those deadly things was hidden. Hearing that, Flint's face fell. Suddenly, the job didn't sound like much fun at all. Arthur lightly tapped his helm, knowing that trusting Bane to memorize every trap location was the ultimate sign of respect. This had to stay strictly between them. Only Arthur and Bane would know the full layout. Absolutely no one else could be involved. He ordered Bane to rotate the work crews through different sections, so no single peasant would ever learn the full defensive grid. If there was even one traitor among them, the consequences would be a total disaster for the kingdom. Once the steel was in the ground, Arthur made it clear: Bane had to report every single coordinate back to him personally. He even burned the charcoal sketches he'd used to explain the plan, warning Bane not to draw a thing. Every location had to stay locked in his head. Bane admitted it sounded like a heavy burden, but he swore on his life to live up to Arthur's trust. Arthur gave him a nod of approval and told him to get some rest. They'd start the real work under the cover of night. Arthur placed the tablet of decorum outside his manor so every passerby would feel its influence and understand the value of modesty. Exhausted, he told his assistant Alara that he was going to catch some sleep for a while. Bane and the boys would come find him at midnight. "If anything urgent happens before then," he told Alara, "you wake me immediately." Back inside the manor, Arthur lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering how much time they really had left. There was still so much to do. Training the knights into specialized units, building the outer walls, organizing patrols, unlocking new tech, and expanding their borders. To Arthur, the list felt endless. Still, he decided to enjoy this rare chance to breathe, and he fell asleep almost instantly. Suddenly, Arthur woke up in a tavern, surrounded by beautiful girls and plenty of wine. He asked them to introduce themselves. "Meet Sophia, Lily, and Diana." Arthur laughed, thinking he'd clearly had one too many drinks. But honestly, he was just happy to be back, no longer stuck in those nerve-wracking days of trying to survive in the wild. He was enjoying their company when Sophia leaned in, whispering that it was time to get up and work. Arthur just groaned that he really couldn't do any more. Then the girl said she wasn't Sophia. He guessed a few other names, but he was wrong every single time. Finally, she announced that she was actually Bane. Arthur jolted awake in pure horror, screaming his head off. It had all been a nightmare. Furious and confused, he demanded to know why Bane was in his bedroom. Bane's response: Arthur told him to come at night, but when he arrived, Arthur grabbed him and started flirting. Arthur just sat there, completely short-circuited and dumbfounded. Luckily, Alara cut in, saying it was all a giant misunderstanding, and they needed to get to work right now. A little while later, Arthur was out in the field teaching the crew how to build traps, using a massive spike pit as the first example. He explained that their enemies and the beasts they faced were enormous, so these pits had to be deep and wide enough to actually work. Then Arthur showed them the proper way to hide the pits with brushwood and leaves. He reminded them to pair these with the tripwires he taught earlier. Mixing trap types is key. He even added that Garrick could teach them a few other clever designs. Garrick looked totally lost and admitted he didn't know the first thing about traps. Arthur just asked if he remembered the moving target from spear training. Swap the heavy log for a weighted net and add a trigger, Arthur explained, and boom, you've got a trap. After that, Arthur left the heavy lifting to Bane and the others, heading back quietly while hoping he could somehow find that tavern dream again. But back at the outpost, Arthur was shocked to find the place completely empty. Usually, everyone was already up and bustling by now. He went to check the houses, but when he tried to step into the women's quarters, they immediately yelled for him to stay out. When Arthur asked what was going on, their voices turned dead serious. Apparently, some of them were only half-dressed, so no one wanted to step outside. Arthur realized the asterisk tablet of decorum was working a little too well. He shut the door and told them they had half a day to sew new clothes. "If you're not out by noon," he warned, "I'll enforce the rules without mercy." Standing near the plaque, Arthur marveled at just how powerful its effect really was. Suddenly, Bane came sprinting over, shouting his name. When Arthur turned, Bane excitedly said they'd uncovered something huge while digging the traps. Arthur's eyes lit up immediately. What Bane had found was flint, an absolutely massive discovery for their tech. He explained that flint opened up endless possibilities, especially since striking it hard would finally give them reliable sparks. Arthur and Bane hurried back to the dig site. Once there, Bane pointed out the spot where they'd been excavating around a strange stone. But after one look, Arthur's heart sank. There wasn't actually much flint here at all. Since this wasn't dry, saline wasteland, if the flint had formed naturally here, there was only one likely explanation. He told Bane to inspect the soil more carefully. Bane agreed, noting that the patch of earth was softer than the rest and filled with things that didn't look like rocks. When Bane actually tasted the stuff to check, he instantly panicked. It was dung, pure waste. He felt sick immediately, while Arthur had already guessed there was likely a massive, ancient dung pit buried underneath them. Honestly, he was just completely baffled. Was this some ancient settlement that actually had plumbing, or had it simply been an old outpost for the Goliath lords? Cedric ordered Alaric to gather the rare flint, bury the site to hide their presence, and set up a rotating guard shift with new signal fires on the heights. Alaric just stood there looking completely lost. Signal fires, beacons. He had no clue what the Lord was talking about. Fast forward 4 days, Cedric is strolling through the estate, admiring the rows of new stone cottages. To him, this was the first real step toward building a true home. Suddenly, Beatrice charges at him like a runaway horse, nearly gave him a heart attack. He shouts for Sir Lionel to stop her, but it's too late. Beatrice tackles Cedric in a massive hug, and crash, she literally levels one of the new houses in the process. Lionel's panicking, asking if the Lord is still alive while yelling at Beatrice to get off. She just clings tighter, sobbing and begging him not to die. "We just finished the cottages. You can't leave us now." Talk about a dramatic entrance. Cedric groans that the playtime is over, then asks, "Wait, did she say the houses are actually done?" She beams with pride. 2 perfect rows, 10 houses in total, enough to fit 50 people comfortably. Cedric gives her a well-earned pat on the head for the hard work. But duty first. He tells her to watch her strength and makes her repair the house she just flattened before heading off to check the granaries. Down by the riverbank, things are looking up. The river folk are hauling in massive catches, with Alina and the girls helping salt and dry the fish for winter. Cedric realizes these river folk are absolute naturals, way better at fishing than digging ditches. With their help, the new kingdom has way more food and plenty of variety. Lionel can't help but praise his lord. Look at what we've built. Everything's looking prosperous, but Cedric is still dwelling on the Greenwood Marquisate. Was the way he subdued them really right? What happens next time? Lionel tells him to stop, second-guessing himself. Your word is our will, my lord. In this world, only the strong survive. There's nothing wrong with winning. Factions clash every single day, so winning with the fewest lives lost. That's mercy for both sides. Cedric smiles. Lionel is finally showing the grit needed for the long road ahead. But there's no time to relax. He asks Lionel to help inspect the borders. He's convinced the Riverlands still have surprises in store, like that elite frogman unit. Meanwhile, Alaric and the boys are sweating over the new snares and watchtowers. When Cedric arrives, he checks the progress of the defenses. Alaric reports that the west, south, and north signal towers are all standing, just like he ordered. But there's a problem. After putting 6 men on watch duty, they have almost nobody left to actually build anything. They're working from dawn till dusk just to stay on schedule, and morale is getting thin. Cedric gets it. The manpower shortage is real. New plan. Starting today, Lionel and I are joining the work detail on the mountain. Alaric tries to protest, but Cedric shuts it down instantly. This is a crisis point. Every second counts. He can't stop thinking about the Goliath lords. If they used to live here, they know this terrain better than anyone. If they strike while the defenses are still half-finished, the next attack will be a bloodbath. That night, Cedric is working right alongside the men when he suddenly stops. He looks toward the western tower. Something feels wrong. Just his imagination. Nope. Screams suddenly tear through the night coming from the southern tower. Cedric spins around. There it is, the distress signal. Move, everyone move. The south watchtower is under fire. Cedric sprints south, his mind racing through every trap and pitfall he'd planned. Even with his enhanced speed, it's still at least a 5-minute dash to the southern peaks. He can only pray he's fast enough. At the tower, Gawain is on patrol when he notices the perimeter snares have been triggered. He's baffled. How did the enemy slip this far into the territory without being seen? Then it hits him. This could be a diversion. Another group might be closing in under the cover of the chaos. He decides to strike first and hunts for the intruder. Gawain lunges with his spear, but his opponent is a beast, swatting the weapon aside and forcing him to dive. And then the real shock hits. The shadow is on him in a heartbeat. Gawain has 0 time to react and just throws his arms up in a desperate guard. To his absolute relief, the attacker stops. It's Cedric. Gawain's jaw drops. My lord, why are you on the south side? No time for talk, Cedric barks. Do you know exactly where the traps went off? Gawain points to the spot and mentions he's the one who lit the signal. Cedric orders him to wait for the others on the safe path, then bring them in as backup. Arthur reached the triggered snares, but his senses caught nothing. Just silence. Cold, heavy silence. This was no forest beast. Since the captive hadn't cried out, Arthur wondered, were they unconscious, or was a trap within a trap waiting for him? He peered into the pit and froze. It was Lady Alara. He barked at her, demanding to know why she was out here when her wounds were still supposed to be healing. Alara snapped back, asking why he was standing there playing interrogator instead of pulling her out of the damn hole. Arthur just smirked, teasing her by tickling her feet until she nearly exploded with rage. Then, the sound of Sir Harold and the others approaching cut the moment short. Alara hissed a warning. If anyone saw her in this embarrassing state, Arthur had better make sure they never spoke again. Arthur tensed, telling her to stay low while he handled it. He roared for the scouts to halt exactly where they stood. He warned them it was a death trap. Baron Silas looked baffled, wondering if Arthur had walked straight into a rebel ambush. Should they charge in and rescue their commander? Sir Harold shook his head. Probably not. From Arthur's tone, he didn't sound like he was dying, more like he was hiding something he didn't want them to see. Silas muttered that Arthur had been acting strange since the last crusade. Even the noblewomen avoided them at the springs now. Everything felt off. Meanwhile, Arthur finally hauled Alara to safety and let out a sharp laugh. He never expected a highborn warrior like her to stumble into a common snare. At least the trap worked. Alara scoffed, impressed despite herself by his bizarre frontier tricks. Arthur's smile faded as he asked what had brought her into the dark woods at such an hour. Alara explained she'd overheard the Shorehaven refugees talking. 2 of the clan members were desperate for the coast, craving fish and sea salt to regain their strength, hoping the protein would give them the power to work the fields. But the cliffs were swarming with a vicious pack of shadow wolves. No one dared to set foot on the shore for fear of being torn apart. That's why she was scouting a safer path. But Arthur frowned. He'd walked those cliffs 5 days ago, and there wasn't a single wolf in sight. He suspected a Shorehaven trader had slipped away to lure the pack into their territory on purpose. Alara's eyes turned cold. If there was a rat in the Shorehaven ranks, she suggested immediate execution. Arthur waved it off. That wasn't the play. He was focused on the gaps in their armor. They needed a proper night's watch. The coastal road had to be purged. The seafood was a fine bonus, but Arthur had bigger plans. The real prizes were the moorfowl and their eggs. Plus, he wanted to establish a royal salt pan for the kingdom. It was settled. At first light, the wolves die. Alara claimed the duty of organizing the hidden sentries herself. Still, she urged him to be careful about pushing their borders so far into the wild. Arthur grinned, asking if she was actually worried about him. Flustered, Alara told him not to flatter himself. She warned that with their small numbers, splitting the guard between 2 fronts was nothing short of a suicide mission. She reminded him the Ironcrag clan had already raided the beach once. What if they returned? Arthur countered that lightning rarely strikes twice in the same place. He sketched out his vision, the main fortress and the coastal outpost, along with the Ironcrag peaks, formed a perfect strategic triangle. If they kept the supply lines moving, they could dominate the entire region. Alara didn't fully grasp his grand design, but since he'd made his choice, she would stand by him. Hours later, Arthur, Sir Gareth, Commander Langdon, and the Shorehaven recruits reached the spot where the beast was sighted. Gareth looked at the young scout. "You're sure? There's no scent of blood on the wind." The boy insisted he'd seen the pack 2 days prior. As he stepped forward, a shadow wolf suddenly erupted from the brush. Gareth moved like lightning, striking the beast down and shielding the boy. But in an instant, snarling wolves hemmed them in from every side. Langdon told Arthur to stay sharp. Arthur just smiled. With the Shorehaven steel at their side, a pack of mongrels was nothing. Gareth shouted for Arthur to take the left flank while he crushed the right. The skirmish began, and the Shorehaven recruits carved through the wolves with brutal efficiency. Arthur watched closely, testing the mettle of his new soldiers. One beast lunged for Arthur's throat. He didn't even draw his sword. He just caught it by the neck and crushed the life out of it. In mere minutes, the pack was slaughtered. Gareth grumbled, disappointed that the fight ended before he could even break a sweat. Arthur told him to save his energy and kept the line moving. Gareth sighed, noting that this land once belonged to their ancestors. When they reached the summit, Arthur pointed to the jagged cliffside. "There," he declared, "that's where we build our fortress." It had to be anchored to the stone, large enough for 20 knights, with a beacon tower to signal the heavens. Once the tower stood tall, Arthur planned to build the salt pans right beneath its shadow. Arthur promised Sir Hector he'd send reinforcements soon, but laid down the law. He had exactly 4 days to get the job done. No excuses. For a split second, Arthur felt like a royal architect inspecting a massive construction site, which was ironic considering he was the one doing all the heavy lifting. Safety first. Before heading out, Arthur gave strict orders. If things went south, they were to light the beacon fires immediately. Fast forward 3 days. Arthur finally finished carving a masterwork longbow, banking 5 legacy points in the process. Just then, Alaric rushed in with news. Silas the scout was back. Arthur didn't waste time. He pulled Silas aside, demanding to know if he'd found any northern clans to recruit or crush. The report wasn't great. Silas had trekked north for over a day and found absolutely nothing. Just empty, silent wilderness. Well, not quite nothing. He found a massive lake beneath a jagged, snow-capped peak and something strange lurking in the depths. Before Silas could get a good look, the thing vanished into the dark water. Between the mysterious lake dweller and the looming mountain, Silas lost his nerve and hauled tail back to the kingdom. Arthur just laughed it off, patting him on the back. He teased that Silas was clearly more terrified of a little snow than a literal lake monster. But Silas wasn't joking. Shaking, he told Arthur that the mountain was the real nightmare. Had the king really never heard the legends? Arthur went to ask what was so spooky, but suddenly, Alara threw her arms around him, trembling with pure cold fear. "What's the big deal with a mountain?" Arthur asked. Alaric looked him dead in the eye. The mountain itself wasn't the problem. It was what lived on the other side. A giant. Arthur pulled her close, promising that as long as he was around, no monster would touch them. Then ping, the system dropped a new quest, find the giant. Reward, 1 attribute point. Arthur was floored. Just for looking at the guy, 1 point. He nearly died fighting off a saber-toothed tiger for 2, so this felt suspicious. He figured it couldn't be that bad. Maybe the giant was just some tall bloke living in a cave. Scouting from a distance should be a breeze, right? Plus, if these giants actually had a civilization, they might make for some pretty powerful allies. Still, he couldn't be reckless. 1 wrong move and his entire kingdom would be served on a silver platter to a monster. This wasn't a job for scouts. Arthur told Silas to go hit the tavern and rest up for the Royal Union in 2 days. He'd handle the heavy lifting. Silas didn't need to be told twice. He was just glad he didn't have to go back to that mountain and face certain death. Lady Isolde noticed Silas was a bit of a wreck. Arthur nodded. It wasn't just nerves, it was something deeper. Silas had a 6th sense for danger that kept him breathing, while everyone else ended up as monster chow. That instinct was worth its weight in gold. Arthur turned his focus back to the big day, asking Isolde if the Royal Union preparations were finished. She confirmed everything was perfect. "Pack for 4, Arthur ordered. He was leading this expedition himself. When Isolde realized he was going into the unknown, she went pale. She asked if it was a suicide mission, but Arthur just gave her a confident grin. Just a quick scouting trip, nothing to worry about. He requested the essentials: rations, water skins, and heavy furs. He even told her to give 𝑑𝒓𝒊𝒎𝒊𝒕𝒊𝒗𝒆 a raise for the quality of the gear. Alaric asked when the march began. Arthur's answer: the Union was in 2 days, so they'd move out right after the feast. 2 days later, Arthur was ready. He'd even crafted a new shield for the journey. He showed it off, hardwood reinforced with thick cowhide. It was light as a feather. He told the men they all needed to upgrade their gear and fast. Suddenly, Rowan burst in. Time to get dressed. When Arthur stepped out in the sovereign's regalia, the entire kingdom erupted in cheers. Standing there, Arthur couldn't help but wonder, was this union basically just a massive royal wedding? Back in his old life, he was just trying to survive the day. Now, he had a kingdom, loyal subjects, and a wife. It felt like a fever dream. But for the first time, looking at the cheering faces, he felt like he finally belonged somewhere. Arthur walked up to Genevieve and took her hand. He told her straight, if he didn't come back, the fate of Avalonia was in her hands. Then he turned to the crowd and made it official. Genevieve was now their queen. The roar from the people was deafening, pure, raw emotion. Even little Millicent was bawling her eyes out, crying about how no one could ever replace the king. Talk about a tear-jerker. As the fires died down and the feast ended, Arthur finally breathed a sigh of relief. The ceremony had actually gone off without a single disaster. Rowan walked up with a mischievous smirk, whispering that Queen Genevieve was waiting for him in the royal chambers. Time to go. Arthur started to blush, thinking about his new bride, until he remembered her favorite hobby involved a leather whip. Suddenly, he was sweating for a different reason. He sucked it up and headed for the palace. He took a deep breath, pushed the doors open, and called out, "I'm home." The second he saw her face, his blood turned to ice. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke a horse. Arthur froze. Why did it suddenly feel like he was standing on the executioner's block? Genevieve told him he had exactly one chance to explain himself. "Explain what?" he squeaked. Genevieve didn't answer. She just slowly stood up and unfurled the whip. "Are we still playing games, Arthur?" Pure terror. Arthur hit his knees, begging for mercy. "Be gentle, please, it's our wedding night." Privately, our hero Cedric was seriously regretting ever giving Lady Alara that whip upgrade. Why? Because right after his knighting ceremony, she was already breathing down his neck, demanding to know why he was in such a rush to leave her for some dangerous quest. Seeing her fire up like that, Cedric had to take a breath and try to play it cool, begging her to just calm down so he could actually explain himself. He laid out the whole grand vision, and Alara caught on quick. She asked if he was seriously planning to convince the legendary giants to join their side against the brutal stone lords. Cedric admitted he wasn't sure he could even win those massive titans over. So for everyone's safety, the true purpose of this journey had to stay a total secret for now. He also confessed something. He just didn't get why veteran warriors like Samuel and Arthur were so absolutely terrified of these giants. Hearing that, Alara insisted she should go along as his shield, but Cedric shut that down fast. One of them had to stay back to lead the clan, and besides, he had a much more important mission for her. Alara looked at him, confused, asking what could possibly be more important than protecting him. Cedric pulled out a specialized stone sling and told her he'd show her the mechanics later. But by the time he got back, he needed her to have an elite marksman team fully trained and ready for war. Cut to the next morning, and Cedric is officially on the move toward the Titan's Pass, flanked by Sir Harold, the powerhouse Hector, and the silent Seraphina. Our boy was actually in high spirits, whistling a tune to himself, while Seraphina just trailed behind him with a look that could literally kill. Cedric started getting those nervous sweats, wondering if she was intentionally walking behind him just to wait for the perfect moment to shove a blade in his back. But honestly, his hands were tied. This was Alara's call, and what went down the night before was actually pretty simple. When Cedric tried his usual flirting with Alara, she basically told him to cut the nonsense and stay focused. Then she demanded to know his reasoning for this team. She wondered why, out of everyone in the Oakheart and Seawall clans, he chose these three. Cedric explained that Hector was a must-have because he'd seen the man's absolute beast mode in a fight. And as for the coastal outpost, Sir Barnaby would be holding down the fort while they were gone. Alara didn't care about the others, but she made one thing very clear. She wouldn't let him leave unless Seraphina went along to watch his back every second of the day. She stepped in close and promised Cedric that she'd already dealt with Seraphina's past attitude problems with some harsh discipline, so he had nothing to worry about. Back in the present, though, Cedric was still totally on edge, and having Seraphina looming behind him with all that simmering rage wasn't exactly helping his nerves. At this point, Cedric was basically glued to Sir Alistair's side like a shadow, convinced that if things went south, Alistair was the only one who could actually save him. Alistair muttered that he felt like they were being watched by something in the shadows, but then he just shrugged it off, thinking his mind was playing tricks on him. Hector chimed in, asking Cedric if he knew about the massive lake just up ahead, and Cedric nodded, remembering Samuel mentioning it once or twice. Hector let out a rough laugh, guessing Samuel must have seen the beast that lives there, too, because when he was just a kid, he saw something unforgettable. He watched the lake monster swallow a full-grown leopard in a single gulp, and instead of being scared, this absolute madman was actually hoping for a real fight with the creature this time. Cedric was just stunned. How does anyone look at a nightmare like that and think, yeah, that's lucky? He told Hector that some overgrown lake beast didn't really do it for him. He was looking for something that actually presented a challenge, something like the giants. That name made Sir Harold visibly flinch, and he practically begged Cedric not to go looking for trouble with those things. Cedric laughed it off as a joke, then asked if these giants were even real or just some tall tales. Harold's face went pale as he explained that before they met Cedric, their house had over 30 members until the day they crossed paths with a giant, and they were completely helpless. Everyone ran for their lives in total chaos, and Harold said that none of the survivors could ever scrub that horrific sight from their memories. Suddenly, it all clicked for Cedric. Now he finally understood why warriors like Samuel and Arthur started shaking the moment giants were mentioned. Suddenly, Hector cut the tension, warning the group not to touch the nearby fruit because he'd tried it as a kid and almost didn't make it. Cedric used his secret insight to check the plants, and yep, they were definitely packed with deadly toxins. He realized the entire forest was full of strange flora, so he triggered a full scan to see what else was around, and the results were mind-blowing. Every single plant had massive medicinal value. Cedric was floored. The entire forest was basically a natural pharmacy, just waiting to be harvested. Then he spotted something that looked strangely familiar, and after a quick check, he realized he'd found wild golden grain. His eyes lit up. This was the jackpot. Right then, a new quest popped up. He had to plant and successfully grow a massive harvest within 180 days. Cedric immediately realized they were finally moving from being hunters to becoming actual farmers. Once they found some clay, they could start cooking and making real potions. But since the grain wasn't ripe yet, he decided to mark the spot and come back later. But then, right in that moment, Cedric's senses went haywire, and for once it wasn't because of Seraphina's glaring. Harold pointed toward the brush, and Cedric spun around, ready for a fight to the death. But instead of a monster, he found a leaf with fibers so strong they'd be perfect for making rope or even paper, and he started praising Harold for finding something so useful for their clothes. Harold shook his head, looking terrified. He wasn't talking about the grass. He was talking about the low growling coming from behind the bushes. Cedric looked over just as a hyena stepped into the light, and he realized the pack had been stalking them this whole time. Those eyes they felt earlier, that was them. Realizing these beasts were back for blood and looking for revenge, the mood shifted instantly. Cedric told the group not to let a single one escape. It was time to wipe out the threat once and for all, and the battle began. Hector lunged forward, fueled by pure rage and determined to end those shadow hounds once and for all. But then, disaster. Ilara was suddenly cut off, with 3 of the beasts leaping straight for her throat. Hector didn't miss a beat, swinging back and clearing the hounds with ease. When she tried to thank him, he just grunted and told her to save it. It was his job to keep her alive, after all. The hounds began to retreat into the fog, and Hector actually laughed, calling it a pity they were running away. But Cedric wasn't having it. He roared for them not to let the beasts escape. He was sick and tired of these endless ambushes. They took off in a desperate chase. But Cedric quickly realized that even with his enhanced agility, he could barely match their speed. Keeping up was impossible. Then, a chilling, eerie silence swallowed the forest behind him. He spun around and froze. Ilara was gone, caught in the crushing grip of some massive, twisted plant monster. Cedric's mind raced as he identified the threat, a bloodthorn bloom. It was a monstrous, predatory plant that lured prey with its scent before melting them down with corrosive slime. Cedric was stunned. A man-eating flower. First it was giant predators, then actual titans, and now this nightmare. These wildlands were getting weirder by the second. Ilara tried to fight back, desperately slashing at the thick vines with her bone blade. But the weapon slipped from her hand and fell right into the flower's gaping maw, where it dissolved into nothing instantly. The sight left everyone absolutely horrified. Cedric screamed at Hector and Harold, demanding to know why they were just standing there like statues. "Save Ilara, now!" Harold yelled back through gritted teeth. They weren't refusing to help. They were trapped too, pinned down by the creature's hidden vines. Cedric immediately started hacking at the plant's tentacles, shouting for Alara to hang on until he could reach her. Alara cried out, telling Cedric to forget about her and save Hector and Harold instead. "Just run," she begged, but before he could get there, the blooms swallowed her whole. Pure rage flooded Cedric, but he forced himself to stay focused. He had to free Hector and Harold first if they were going to survive this. Then, to his shock, the hounds attacked from behind again. Hector helped by hurling whatever he could grab at the pack to drive them back, warning Cedric not to come any closer. It was a setup. The hounds had led them right into a literal death trap. Harold also screamed for Cedric to run, saying he could still escape alone while they stalled the pack for as long as possible. Even so, Cedric refused to move, struggling against the vines with everything he had. He realized the hounds weren't actually that fast. They were just exploiting the distraction of the monster to pick them off. Then he spotted a patch of bone-dry trees. Betting his entire life on one move, Cedric whipped out his flint and struck. Sparks flew, and the wood erupted into a massive blaze. In his mind, there wasn't a monster in this world that couldn't be solved with a proper fire roast. The vines caught fire instantly, and Cedric managed to drag Alara from the flower's throat. As soon as she was out, he checked her over anxiously, asking if she was hurt or if she could still move. They weren't done yet. They still had to get Harold out of there. Alara's dress had been shredded in the chaos, so Cedric threw his lord's cloak over her to cover her up. Once everyone was freed, they bolted. As they fled, Cedric kept tossing flintstones at every dead tree they passed, setting more of them on fire, so the hounds wouldn't dare chase them through the wall of flames. Then Cedric spotted a river ahead. He shouted for everyone to keep their legs moving and jump in. The water was their only safety, but one stray hound was still hot on Alara's heels and was about to pounce. Seeing the danger, Cedric roared for her to watch her back and sprinted over to save her. The hound attacked him, but Cedric managed to hold the beast off with sheer force. Hector and Harold stood there tense, unsure of how to help in the chaos. Cedric yelled for them to keep running because the forest fire was spreading way too fast. He promised he'd be right behind them, though he privately worried he wouldn't be able to finish the beast before the flames reached them. Suddenly, an arrow whistled out of nowhere and hit the hound, killing it on the spot. Cedric turned to see who fired and was completely floored. It was Alara. Her hidden talent for archery had finally awakened. Cedric was breathless, asking if she'd actually known how to use a bow this whole time. Alara just wiped her face and said she'd learned by watching him earlier. But then she winced, adding that she'd twisted her ankle and had zero strength left. She couldn't escape on her own and told them they should just save themselves. Cedric shouted that she was talking absolute nonsense, then hoisted her onto his back and took off. Hector was screaming at them to hurry. Their time was running out. He even offered to carry Harold to move faster, but the old man stubbornly refused to be carried like a child. As Cedric kept running, Alara suddenly spoke up. She'd planned to use this chance to accuse him, had he orchestrated that beast attack on the Grove Alliance. Cedric asked why she'd even think that, and Alara just sighed, saying she knew he'd deny it anyway. She explained that the beasts entering their land were already wounded, yet no weapon they had could pierce such thick hides. So, who had hurt them? Cedric's people were unusually good at handling monsters, which only made her even more suspicious. But she knew suspicion alone wouldn't convince the queen, so she'd chosen assassination as the only way to be sure. Alara pressed her bone knife against Cedric's neck right then and there. She asked if he realized that if she struck now, he wouldn't be able to stop her. Or, she pointed out, he could just dump her in the fire and end the problem forever. Cedric didn't even flinch, only telling her to hold on tight because they were almost out. He told her that afterward, she could do whatever she wanted. Alara went quiet, agreeing to let it pass for now, but she warned him she'd be watching his every move. She made it clear, if he ever betrayed Lady Elizabeth or the Grove Alliance, she'd kill him herself. Cedric just asked if that settled things and accepted the terms. Lady Alara was reaching her boiling point. Cedric was being stubbornly silent and still wouldn't admit the truth. Finally, they took the plunge. Diving into the river to escape the inferno, Cedric realized that with 2 of his knights wounded, the hunt for the Titan would have to wait. No choice now. He ordered the squad back to the overgrown glade. They desperately needed more of those healing blooms. Cut to a bit later. Hugo let out a massive sigh of relief as the herbal poultice took hold, finally killing that agonizing pain. "Rest up," Cedric told Hugo and Alara, while he and Arthur headed back out to scavenge for more supplies. But while they were gathering, Arthur's nose suddenly twitched. The rank smell of hyenas, maybe a lingering scent from their earlier skirmish. Then Cedric spotted them. Tiny, fuzzy pups. This pack wasn't out for blood or vengeance after all. They were just protecting their young. Seeing a golden opportunity to tame these beasts into hunting hounds, Cedric eagerly accepted the Soul Mark's new challenge. Suddenly, roar, a thunderous sound shook the forest. Alara gasped, asking what it was, but Cedric's face went pale. He knew that sound instantly. Talk about bad luck. A massive bear lumbered from the shadows, and Hugo shrieked in pure terror. It was a legendary man-eater. Cedric's mind was racing, weighing every single life-or-death option in a heartbeat. Escaping with the wounded was impossible. He barked an order for everyone to retreat, while he stayed behind to draw the beast's fire. Arthur and Alara tried to protest, but Cedric shut them down fast. "You'll only slow me down," he snapped, harsh but true. They had exactly 1 shot at surviving this. He told Arthur to get Ian and Harold to safety, immediately. With the others fleeing, Cedric charged. In a heartbeat, he was standing toe-to-toe with the massive beast. Cedric swung first, but the bear wasn't having it. 1 massive swipe sent him flying, leaving him bruised and battered. Arthur saw his lord go down and panicked. He urged Harold and Alara to take the pup and run while he went back for the king. But Hugo screamed for Arthur to stay back. He'd seen Cedric's terrifying strength before and knew better than to interfere. In his eyes, no enemy could truly break Cedric, and staying behind would only restrict the king's movement. So they followed orders and bolted. Meanwhile, Cedric realized he finally had the bear's undivided, murderous attention. The plan now, simple: lead the monster deep into the woods, then make a clean break for it. He taunted the beast, and the second it lunged, he sprinted in the exact opposite direction of his friends to keep them safe. Once he'd put enough distance between them, he figured the squad was far enough away. Time to lose this monster and vanish. But then whoosh, something lunged from the shadows behind him. He barely dodged. Was it a giant sewer rat? Nope. To his absolute shock, it was that same saber-toothed tiger he'd clashed with when he first arrived in this world. Even the big cat looked stunned to see him again, but the reunion was cut short when the bear finally caught up. Now he was in real danger. Handling both was suicide, so he considered tapping into his primordial might. But he knew the cost: weeks of crippling weakness or even falling into a coma for days. Even worse, if he survived but was unconscious, the Stone Lords could just walk in and finish the job. As the 2 predators closed in on him, Cedric kept dancing between them, desperately trying to get them to clash. Suddenly, the soul mark flashed red. Extreme danger. It triggered the forbidden emergency escape mode. For 10 minutes, his speed would skyrocket, but at a brutal cost. 1/3 of his power would be gone forever. The second it kicked in, Cedric felt a surge of raw, terrifying power like nothing he'd ever experienced. He launched into the air, dodging both lunges and making the bear and tiger slam into each other with a satisfying crunch. He felt light as a feather and explosively fast. Even so, both beasts were still chasing him, which definitely felt wrong. Why weren't they fighting each other? Eventually, he finally managed to shake them off, though the regret was already sinking in. Escape mode was a godsend, sure, but that permanent stat penalty was absolutely brutal. He realized he'd run all the way to the Frost Peaks. With the timer still ticking, he used his godlike speed to look for the Titan. Honestly, thank heavens for the buff. Without it, the waist-deep snow would have drained him in seconds. Reaching the summit, Cedric finally spotted a massive figure. Could it be the legendary Titan of the North? Ding, quest complete. But the soul mark wasn't done. It updated with a second, even crazier objective. Attack the Titan for 10 attribute points. Cedric was fuming. Had the Oracle completely lost its mind? Just then, one of the Titan's pets sniffed the air. Cedric didn't wait. He dove into hiding immediately. But those 10 points were just too tempting to ignore. He decided to use his speed for one quick hit-and-run test. He chucked a stone at the behemoth. It sailed through the air and just tinked off the Titan's toe. The giant didn't even notice. But the frost giant's hound caught his scent, immediately growling, sensing an intruder. Arthur, though, he was buzzing. The quest cleared and boom, 10 attribute points straight into his pocket. But wait, the system wasn't done. A third stage popped up. Take down the Colossus solo for a massive 100 points. Looking at that, Arthur hesitated. 100 points? That's legendary. A reward like that could change his entire life in an instant. He stood there, frozen, torn between playing it safe or risking it all. While he was debating, the Colossus got fed up with its pet's noise, slammed the earth, and roared at them to shut their mouths. That single strike sent a massive wall of snow flying, burying Arthur instantly. His senses went completely numb, a brutal reminder of the terrifying power gap between them. Arthur spat out some snow and muttered to himself, "No amount of points, not even 10,000, is worth a one-way trip to the grave." Fast forward to evening at the Ironhold camp a few days later. Lady Alara asked the Night Watch what they'd found, and honestly, they had nothing but apologies. No sign of him, not a trace. Alara didn't hesitate. She ordered them to double the search radius and keep going until they found something. Anya looked grim, whispering that they should prepare for the worst. She was sure Arthur was gone for good. Alara snapped. She was furious, reminding Anya that Arthur had risked everything for them. But then, a scout from the vanguard came charging in, screaming that their king had finally returned. The second Arthur stepped into the territory, everyone swarmed him, panicking over how beat up he looked. Maya pushed through the crowd and noticed Alaric was right there by his side. She demanded to know why Alaric hadn't lit the signal beacon sooner. But Alaric just shook his head. King Arthur had ordered him to keep his return low-key. That's when Alara arrived, yelling at everyone to give the man some space. She grabbed Arthur, sent the crowd back to their posts, and made it clear she was the only one looking after him tonight. She threw out a final warning, too. If anyone leaked word of his condition, they'd be answering to her. And trust me, you don't want that. Everyone turned pale and nodded. Message received. Back inside the house, Arthur sighed in relief, glad Cedric and the boys made it back safely. He even chuckled, seeing they brought home a few direwolf cubs. He suggested letting Cedric raise them for backup on future hunts. But Alara wasn't having it. She snapped at him to worry about his own skin first. No matter how invincible he felt, his body had limits. Arthur tried to play it cool, saying the injuries weren't even that bad. He was just exhausted, really. A good night's sleep would fix him right up, and then he'd get back to leading the tribe. Alara didn't say a word. She just pressed her leg onto his stomach and slowly slid it down. "Fine," she told him, but reminded him that as a king, he didn't need to carry every burden alone. More importantly, she looked him in the eye and said she wasn't ready to lose her man just yet. Then, bam, she suddenly stepped right on his sensitive spot. Arthur went stiff, practically begging for mercy until she finally let go and told him to sleep. Arthur lay there stunned. Alara was getting way more dominant lately. Outside, Baron Roland asked her how the boss was doing. Alara just shrugged. He's fine, just needs rest. And she made it very clear nobody disturbs him, period. Later, Arthur pulled up his system screen. Even after losing 4 points in the chaos, he was still up by 10 overall. Not a bad haul. The trip was worth it, sure. But he realized something vital. Having high strength is useless if you're too slow to dodge a killing blow in an emergency. Survival is all about speed. So Arthur dumped everything into agility. It hit 5 points, and then the system pinged a threshold. From now on, every point in agility was going to cost double the effort. Talk about a steep tax. Arthur started doing the math. If it hits another wall at 10, does it double again? Quadruple. This was going to be a nightmare. Reaching 22 agility seemed impossible now. He wondered if every stat had these hidden walls, so he decided to push them all to the limit to find out. As he pumped points into his physical durability, a violent surge of energy tore through his veins. It felt like his skin was about to pop. RIIP. His shoes and trousers shredded as his entire frame bulked up, his muscles expanding like crazy. Only 2 stats left to hit the threshold. Absolutely drained, Arthur collapsed back onto the bed, planning to max out the rest as soon as he woke up. He passed out instantly. Sometime later, life in the Ironhold territory was finally back on track and running like clockwork. Lady Alara was out in the courtyard, training the recruits with slingshots. She showed them how it's done, hitting 6 targets dead on, grazing one, and only missing once. Suddenly, Arthur strolled up out of nowhere, praising everyone for their progress on their first try. Alara spun around, eyes narrowing. She immediately demanded to know why he was out of bed after she'd clearly told him to rest. Arthur insisted he was fine, but Alara spotted his brand new trousers. She immediately suspected he'd been visiting another woman and got ready to punish him again. Arthur started sweating, explaining that his old clothes literally exploded because his power level jumped so much. He was basically begging her to drop it. She finally let him off the hook. She told him the Slinger Squad was formed, even if they still needed more time to become true marksmen. Arthur shifted the subject, asking how Master Hugh and the others were holding up after their injuries. Alara sighed. Roland refused to stay in bed. He didn't want to be a burden, so he went down to the river to help Hugh. Nothing to worry about there. The one she was really worried about, Anya. Her injuries were light, but she seemed more restless than ever. Maybe because Lady Alara had given her a piece of her mind earlier, Aveline was in a pretty sour mood. Alaric sat Alara down, explaining that Aveline truly cared and carried a heavy burden in silence, so he urged her to show a bit more grace. After that, Alaric announced he was turning in to rest. In just a few days, he had to march north to harvest those precious golden wheat fields, all while keeping his mind busy with his latest inventions. Fast forward a bit, and Alaric had finished drafting a number chart from 1 to 9. His next goal, teaching the basics of math to kickstart a written language. This little educational push earned him 20 attribute points. That's when things got wild. The system pinged. His technology points hit 100, unlocking a brand new technology emporium. This shop allowed him to trade points for advanced tools and ancient heritage plaques, but there were no refunds, so every choice mattered. The system rolled out a massive catalog, showing every resource and relic he could now get his hands on. His eyes lit up at the possibilities. Alaric scanned the list, carefully weighing his very first purchase. Honestly, you've got to wonder, what's the first thing he's going to grab? Between the threat of the Iron Peak clan and the rising tension with Seraphina, things are about to get messy. We'll have to see how it all unfolds. Stay tuned. With the store finally open, Alaric did a quick inventory check and dropped 30 technology points on a heavy iron cauldron. Talk about a steal. He didn't just want it for soup. Because it was solid iron, he could strap it to his back as makeshift armor. Attach it to an arm, boom, instant shield. But in a real life-or-death struggle, this thing could definitely be a lethal weapon. Alaric was so hyped about his new toy, he didn't even notice the massive racket he was making. Hearing the loud clanging, Lucas rushed in, worried about his king. Instead, he found Alaric doing a weird victory dance around the pot, leaving the poor guy completely baffled. Feeling a bit embarrassed, Alaric played it off, claiming he was just communing with the spirits. But hey, it was time for some actual work. He dug out a fire pit by hand, making sure there was enough ventilation for the smoke and room for the logs. Next step, set the cauldron over the flames and get that water boiling. To his shock, the system recognized this as a milestone, rewarding him with 10 more technology points. Not a bad start. A long time ago, Alaric had learned a lifetime of secrets from a professor he looked up to. He just never thought he'd be using that knowledge to survive in the wild. Once the water was bubbling, he tossed in the main ingredients, fresh seafood, and started his first batch of fish stew. He gave it a good stir, and the system chimed in again. 10 points for inventing a new way to cook. Easy money. For Alaric, that meal tasted like pure victory. Right then, Sterling walked in with some massive news. They'd successfully harvested salt from the coastal fields. More points for the bank. And man, that salt made the stew taste 1,000 times better. As a little thank you, Alaric let Sterling have the first taste before sending him back to his post. Those points he spent on the cauldron, already earned back. Talk about a profitable trade. Once the tasting was done, Alaric told Lucas to round up the whole tribe and make sure everyone brought their own bowls. The people had never tasted fish like this before, and the flavors absolutely blew them away. Luckily, the pot was huge, so everyone could go back for seconds. Moira was definitely a fan. 2 bowls down, and she was already looking for a third. Aveline worried they might run out, but Alaric just smiled. There was plenty, and if not, he'd just whip up another batch. He still needed a fresh pot for the night watch and the patrol squads at the border outpost. He planned to head to the outpost himself in a few days to deliver the stew. Seeing the tribe this happy, that's what he lived for. That's why he decided to teach them how to make wooden utensils next. Time for these people to eat their roast beef like true nobility. While the sound of clattering bowls filled the air, Alaric opened the emporium again to hunt for his next upgrade. He had 100 points sitting there, so it was time to invest in something big. He immediately skipped over the math books and basic stoves. Those could wait. What he really needed were high-quality seeds for the next planting season, something the tribe hadn't found yet. But his shopping was cut short. A scout rushed in saying a trap to the north had been triggered. No humans in sight, so it was likely a wild beast, and it might still be alive. Suddenly, Alara appeared out of nowhere. Her usual sharp attitude actually saved him the headache of a long discussion. She barked at the guards, telling them not to pester the king over a stray animal. "Just kill the thing and be done with it," she snapped. Honestly, she was just annoyed Alaric had been too busy to give her any attention. Now he had to play peacemaker at home. He gave her his word. He'd return with something incredible that would change the tribe forever. He sealed the deal with a quick kiss that left her totally flustered. Instead of killing the animal, he was thinking of taming it. Leaving the rest of the work to Alara, he headed out. Those flax bundles the scouts brought earlier were gone, so they'd need to gather a lot more. But the real prize, wild wheat. They needed those seeds to kickstart the kingdom's harvest before the winter frost set in. Arthur scanned the brush for seeds on the way to the snares. No luck. When they finally reached the spot, the woods were dead silent. Creepy, right? One look into the pit, and their collective jaws hit the floor. The beast had been screaming for mercy earlier, but now, just low, pained snarls while its mangled leg bled out. Another direwolf, lured in by hunger. But wait, look at her. One glance and it was obvious she was a nursing mother. Sam S. got a sharp nose for these things, and he caught the scent of milk immediately. This was definitely the mother of those pups they'd rescued. Arthur felt responsible for those little ones, so he climbed right into the pit, ignoring the risk of getting shredded by her claws. They lashed her with heavy rope and hauled her up. Easy work for seasoned knights like them. Exhausted and bleeding, the beast was suddenly as tame as a lapdog. Arthur handed her over to Sam with a simple order: keep her alive. Not exactly a cakewalk, though. Those pups hadn't touched a single scrap of meat yet, so what on earth would the mother eat? Sam tried every trick in the book, but the little ones were just fading away, getting thinner by the hour. Raising wild beasts, way harder than Arthur anticipated, but catching the mother might actually be the miracle they needed to save the pack. The moment they returned, Arthur had the mother bound, fed, and brought straight to her starving pups. Hopefully, that reunion would do the trick, so Sam sprinted back to the village to check on them immediately. Arthur prayed these beasts could be tamed. He sent a knight to check the other snares while he pushed the rest of the party further north. The deeper they trekked into the wild, the more creatures began to emerge from the thick shadows of the forest. Talk about perfect timing. They found the wild wheat just as it ripened. A few days later, and the whole crop would have been lost. Total divine intervention, right? Since they had time to kill, Arthur decided to start stocking up on healing herbs while they were at it. Honestly, their best haul in ages. Resources were stacking up long before the sun even started to set on them. But as twilight fell across the woods, the real monsters came out to play. Arthur recognized that roar instantly, a massive bear. He hissed at everyone to dive into the thicket, now. They went stone-cold silent, but the beast was moving fast. It was right on top of them. They could have ditched their heavy packs to run, but Arthur forbade it. No chance he was leaving those supplies behind. He ordered them to stay put and let the monster pass by. Nobody dared to argue. Still, they were all coiled like springs, ready to bolt if the bear caught their scent. Survival is priority number one, but seeing his fierce knights crouching in the mud like that, Arthur almost burst out laughing. Still, that bear prowling around felt strangely familiar. Was it the same one they'd crossed paths with before? The roar faded, and the guys got sloppy, starting to whisper foolish questions like kids. Arthur was absolutely fuming at their lack of discipline. He shut them up quick with a grim promise. One more word, and I'll feed you to the beast myself. Irony at its finest. His own threat was loud enough to catch the bear's attention, and the monster turned right back toward them. The bear was losing it, smashing into trees and stumbling like a drunk. It was clearly mangled and blinded by pure, unadulterated agony. Cedric whispered, "Hey, that's a lot of steak," but they weren't the only hunters in these woods tonight. A sudden shout echoed through the trees. The bear scrambled up and took off, running for its life from a new set of hunters. It was the Highland Raiders, the exact same scumbags who had crossed Hector in the past. Pure rage took over. Hector lunged out of the brush to attack, but Arthur snatched him back into the shadows just in time. They hit the dirt with a loud thud. One of the raiders stopped. He definitely heard something moving in the bushes. Luckily, the raiders stayed focused on the bear and moved on. But Hector, he was looking at Arthur like he'd lost his mind. In his head, this was the ultimate, perfect moment for his long-awaited payback. But Arthur held him firm. You can't let hate win. They were hopelessly outnumbered, and a charge now would have been a total suicide mission. Their only edge. The enemy was out in the light, while they were invisible ghosts hidden in the dark shadows. If he wanted blood, he had to wait for the perfect opening. For now, Hector had to swallow his pride and obey. In the clearing, the bear finally gave out, collapsing into the dirt, totally spent and unable to move. One raider started mocking the dying animal, prodding it to stand just to watch it suffer. But their chieftain, he wasn't having it. This bear was a fighter. It had been poisoned by toxic white flowers and gutted with a blade, yet it still ran. Surviving that long was a feat of legend. The chieftain knew a warrior when he saw one, even a beast, and it deserved a clean end. Cruelty is for cowards, not men. As punishment for his disrespect, the chieftain literally hurled the offender into a tree. Talk about leadership. The chieftain cleared the area. He wanted a clean kill, brutal but quick. His weapon of choice, a razor-sharp blade of dark obsidian. Julian's eyes narrowed. He de-spotted the trap, the poisoned bait. Honestly, he didn't think these mountain savages had the brains for such a low-down tactic. It caught him off guard. But then the voice in his head chimed in. It didn't want the beast dead. It wanted Julian to save it. Talk about a suicide mission. Rescuing the same monster that just tried to rip his throat out. Insane. But the voice already knew he'd hate it. Accept now, or lose this chance forever. This was a one-time deal. No time to think. Julian dove in, cursing that invisible voice with every foul word in the book. Pure, unadulterated spite. That's what gave him the strength to catch that obsidian blade just in time. Talk about a party pooper. Julian's entrance completely trashed the chieftain's big execution show. By stealing the clan's prize, Julian had just painted a massive target on his back. He was praying this bear actually knew the meaning of thank you. The moment he committed, a new objective flashed before his eyes. The beast was a mess, gut-stabbed and full of toxic sludge. 10 minutes. Julian had 10 minutes to stop the bleeding and purge the poison, or it was game over. Crap, he'd completely forgotten about the venom. His mind was racing, trying to find a way out. The goal was to save the bear, not to spark a full-scale war with the Highland Raiders. A direct clash was the last thing Julian wanted, but there was no time to negotiate. Across the clearing, the enemy lord recognized Julian from his time with the coastal clan. His arrogant smirk, it made Alistair's blood boil. The lord didn't even remember Alistair's name. Hector ground his teeth, just waiting for the order to kill. Julian, however, was in his own world. He was too focused on the system alerts, which were basically screaming at him about the coming punishment. If he failed, the voice threatened to shrink his manhood, by half. Yeah, that's cold even for a magical interface. Julian could already see Elizabeth dumping him for some farmer. No way. His legacy was not ending like that. Fury took the wheel. He unleashed his power, telling his friends to guard their own lives while he handled the beast. And just like that, all hell broke loose. It was a desperate struggle. His team formed a wall while Julian worked on the bear. He stopped the bleeding in under a minute, easy part done. Next up, the real nightmare, neutralizing a poison he'd never even seen before. Julian was stuck playing doctor, which meant his team was down a fighter. They were losing ground and fast. Things were looking grim. Everyone was covered in blood, barely holding the line so Julian could finish his work. But then, the Highland chieftain called for a halt. Surprisingly, he actually liked these guys. They weren't just some ragtag group of wanderers, they had heart. He offered them a way out, walk away now and live. Alistair wasn't having it. He had a score to settle, and he wasn't leaving until someone paid. He told them they were just getting warmed up. Darkness was falling, but they still had plenty of fight left in them. The others backed his bluff, trying to buy Julian every precious second. But the clock, it was ticking down way too fast. 6 minutes left. Julian still had absolutely no clue how to fix the poison. He could see the truth, though. Even Barnaby was swaying on his feet. If this lasted much longer, the mission was a bust. He could practically hear the voice laughing at him. But Julian was desperate enough to try anything to save his skin, literally. The Highland Lord took their refusal in stride. He dropped into a low, terrifying stance. Boom, he slammed his foot down, sending a literal shockwave through the dirt. Everyone just stood there, paralyzed by the sheer power. Julian moved first. He sacrificed his own blade to shatter the wave, kicking up a massive cloud of dust to cover them. He wanted to avoid this, but now he had to step in. The Lord's curiosity was piqued. Who were these people? They weren't just nobodies. He'd clearly underestimated them. But he wasn't the type to use an entire army to squash a handful of brave warriors. He heard what he needed and decided to end it. He'd let them go for now, but he promised a real, fair duel on another day. The chieftain was actually impressed. He withdrew his men with a strange sense of honor, taking his wounded with him. That included the idiot he'd smashed into a tree for disrespecting the bear. The guy was a literal mess, carried away by his comrades. Disaster avoided, at least for the humans. Now, Julian just had to figure out how to purge that poison from the bear. As he worked, the retreating Highlanders couldn't believe it. Why would their lord just walk away from a perfectly good prize? They couldn't wrap their heads around it, but no ancient root. That explained everything. They needed that plant just to stay in the fight. Plus, the dark mana from their sorcerer was tapped out. Alaric was no easy target, that much was clear now. He just shrugged off a blow backed by 70% of the Lord's power. Seeing Alaric that calm, the Lord knew the guy was definitely hiding an ace. Even his blade looked wrong, far too sharp for a backwater tribe to be carrying around. Staring at that obsidian steel, the Lord vowed to go all out next time. Meanwhile, Alaric huddled with the crew for some ideas. Bad news. Nobody knew how to neutralize that nasty toxin. All they could do was watch and hope. Why even save the beast? Some muttered. They thought it was just prey, but Alaric didn't have time to explain the bigger picture. All that mattered was that this was now a life-or-death crisis. The system gave him one last shot, so Alaric went with hearthleaf and bitterbark. Both herbs were legendary for fighting poison, but on this specific sludge, it was anyone's guess if they'd work. They pried the bear's jaws open and shoved in every bit of medicine they had prepared. Alaric waited, heart in his throat. Every second felt like an eternity. Then, ding, finally the system pinged. The bear was stable. Talk about a miracle at the buzzer. With the bear out of the woods, everyone finally let out a breath. Crisis averted, for now. Only Arthur was still fuming, insisting they needed to hunt those raiders down before they vanished into the hills. Alaric, cool as a king, shut it down. They didn't know the enemy's full hand or their traps yet. Rushing in blind, that's just asking for a massacre. Even a win would be too costly. Alaric wasn't wasting lives on a grudge. Those raiders would be back soon enough anyway. He needed a plan, and more importantly, he needed more power. Decisions made. He sent the rest back to Havenbrook while he stayed behind to keep watch over the big guy. He told Garrick to warn Lady Isabella, double the guards and watch the roads. Alone with the animal, Alaric felt the night drag on forever. Scavengers kept sniffing around, drawn by the bear's scent. He had to drive them back, hour after hour. So Alaric spent the entire night brawling with wild beasts. Silver lining, they tasted incredible. Best roast meat he'd had in a while. Right around dawn, the bear finally woke up and followed the smell of food. Alaric, being a pal, handed over a massive chunk of meat. Not sure if the beast liked its steak medium rare, he left a separate pile of raw rabbits nearby, just in case. By the time the fire died out, man and beast were stuffed and finally settling down for a well-earned rest. Boom, mission complete. The system pinged with sympathy points from the bear, ready to be assigned right then and there. Alaric didn't hesitate. He dumped every single point straight into his physical strength. He felt his power surge to a whole new level, a total powerhouse. As he basked in it, the bear nudged over some of its own food. That was its way of showing loyalty. Alaric smiled, took the offering, and shared the meal. Bond secured. Healed up, the bear should have headed back to the wild. Alaric figured they'd cross paths again someday. But the animal had other plans. It grabbed Alaric's tunic, basically begging to go home with him. It wasn't taking no for an answer. A beast that big eats a lot, sure, but having a warbear as a sidekick, that would skyrocket Alaric's reputation instantly. So, despite the bear being a bit of a clumsy oaf, Alaric decided to let it tag along. He named him Barnaby, officially making him part of the village. Grateful, the furball nearly tackled him with licks before falling in line. Now, with a literal tank at his side, Alaric set out to track the raiders and scout their route. High up on Barnaby's back, tracking was a breeze. Those raiders were sloppy, leaving a trail a mile wide. But the woods were changing, getting thicker. Only one thing it could be, a bamboo grove. And bamboo, that's not just for building. It's the key to dragonfire. Mix some saltpeter, brimstone, and charcoal in a tube, and you've got yourself a bang. The perfect shell for a devastating explosive. With firecrackers, he could break the enemy's spirit in one go. Even if the blast was weak, the noise alone would send those raiders screaming. He already had the saltpeter and knew how to burn charcoal in a kiln. But brimstone was the snag. That stuff only shows up near volcanoes. He pulled up his map to narrow the search. Just as he thought, a volcano sat near the Great Frost Peak. If he stayed far enough away, he could harvest the sulfur there. Last time he was in that area, he was just trying to survive. He'd completely ignored the riches lying around. But with Barnaby at his side, this trip was going to be a walk in the park. He checked the plan one more time, then told the bear to head north for something epic. They bolted, reaching the lake Arthur and Sela's had found earlier. Alaric looked around and patted Barnaby. "I've been here before," he whispered. "Time to finish this." Cedric hadn't found the time or the curiosity to scout the area back then, but now he could finally settle that score. As they crept toward the lake's edge, total silence fell. They were hunting for the legendary water terror they'd heard stories about, but the surface stayed dead still. Cedric was just about to call it a day when Barnaby suddenly froze, backing away in pure instinct. Right then, the lake started boiling with massive, violent bubbles. Something gargantuan was moving below. A massive, prehistoric head breached the surface, letting out a bone-chilling roar as the rest of its hulking body followed. It was a full-grown great drake, scanning the shore for an easy meal. A frayed rope trailing from its neck suggested this beast once had a master. A dragon lizard? Here, that was the last thing Cedric expected. He and the bear ducked into the tall grass, hearts racing as they sized up the monster. That collar meant one thing. This giant was likely an escaped pet that went wild while its owner was out cold. And if that was true, then the beast that terrified the saber-toothed cats and left those massive tracks in the woods was probably another drake just like this one. If those dots connected, it meant the mountain giant had been asleep for at least 15 days straight. Either way, wasting their best opening to escape would be suicide. The second the beast looked away, Cedric signaled Barnaby to bolt for the mountain. The bear obeyed, carrying him deep into the frozen wastes, but the snow got so thick with every step that they eventually had to grind to a halt. One wrong move, one loud noise, and an avalanche would bury them both alive. There would be no escaping that. Cedric hopped off, which clearly spooked the bear, but honestly, he wanted to stay behind the big guy to cover his back if things went south. He told the bear to keep his head on a swivel. "Stay sharp," he whispered, watching the white landscape for any signs of movement. Bringing Barnaby was a genius move. Every sweep of those massive, powerful paws sent snow flying, clearing the path to the solid earth beneath. Suddenly, a sharp scent hit Cedric's nose. Familiar. He started digging frantically as that burnt match stench of sulfur got stronger and stronger. It took some serious sweat, but he finally hit pay dirt, a massive sulfur deposit hidden right under the frost. This was the game changer for the coming war with the High Peak clans. With this much sulfur, they'd be making fire powder by sunrise tomorrow. After grabbing every scrap he could carry, Cedric loaded the haul onto Barnaby and started the long trek back home. As they reached the first cottages of Oakhaven, Samuel came rushing out, looking genuinely relieved to see Cedric still in one piece. But the sight of a massive bear, that was a shocker. To stop a total panic, Cedric introduced Barnaby and made it clear, nobody touches him. At first, the villagers were terrified of a wild beast in their midst. But wouldn't you know it? Soon, everyone was lining up for a ride. Cedric could have let them, but he wasn't going to let his friend be treated like a circus act. He promised to find them another beast instead. Once the gear was offloaded, he pulled Alaric aside and told him to start drying the bamboo, no questions asked. Then he saw Lady Alara, who was boldly sizing up the bear. She looked impressed by the animal and even prouder of Cedric. But that victory lap didn't last long. Right as he settled in, a scout arrived with some seriously bad news. A massive sea terror had surfaced right off the coast, thrashing around and keeping the entire fishing fleet pinned to the docks. The waves it kicked up were huge, big enough to wash away all the salt drying on the sand, leaving the fishermen completely helpless. Cedric calmed the panicked messenger and immediately headed for the coastline to see this nightmare for himself. Back on Barnaby, he reached the shoreline in minutes. It was a mess. Shattered crates were already bobbing in the freezing surf. The thing was a Leviathan scout, a predatory sea reptile shaped like a giant fish. Aggressive, territorial, and absolutely lethal. It was about 7 meters long, not even full-grown, and hell-bent on killing anything alive. Even Cedric felt a chill watching it rampage. If they didn't take this thing down now, it would wreck the harbor and bankrupt the whole settlement. It had to be stopped. The plan: lure it onto the shallows. Once it hit land, that monster would lose half its strength in an instant. Cedric didn't hesitate. He drove Barnaby straight into the crashing waves, charging right at the reckless, bloodthirsty beast. The first impact sent the bear tumbling, but it worked. The monster's belly was exposed. Cedric leaped off, burying his axe deep into its scales. That only made it angrier. The serpent thrashed, twisting its massive, muscular body around in a spray of blood and cold foam. It clamped its jaws onto Cedric and dragged him down into the freezing depths. The monster shot for the seabed, trying to drown him. Cedric knew he'd be a goner long before it started eating him. Using every ounce of strength, he fought to pry those massive jaws apart. Meanwhile, Barnaby wasn't giving up. He dove into the water, chasing them down before the reptile could reach the deep water. The bear grabbed the beast's tail and started hauling it back to shore. He knew the plan, but man, the struggle was absolutely brutal. Between the crushing pressure of the jaws and the total lack of air, a normal person would have been dead 10 times over. Cedric started to feel the darkness closing in. Hope was gone. Then, out of the murky deep, a mysterious woman appeared. She had twin daggers in her hands. With a blur of steel, she slashed the monster's body, forcing it to finally let him go. Blood clouded the water in a dark red mist, hiding his savior. His lungs were screaming, his limbs went numb, and Cedric started to sink. In those final seconds of clarity, his mind was stuck on one thing: that girl, slicing through the waves like a silver blade. When Arthur finally opened his eyes, Lady Jane was there on the golden sand, her face tight with worry as the rest of the survivors crowded around. He coughed up a lungful of salt water, spotted his savior resting on a nearby crag, and beckoned Alara to come closer. She was the finest hunter the coastal clan had, a girl who lived in the surf and knew exactly where to slide a blade into a beast to end its life in an instant. Now look, it's no secret that the coastal folk aren't exactly known for being master tacticians. But even among them, Alara seemed a bit simple. Still, she just saved his skin, so Arthur pushed that aside and gave her his most sincere thanks. What really caught his eye were those obsidian daggers she was carrying. When asked, she simply said she'd taken them from a bad man who'd trespassed on their sands. Alara answered him fast enough. But then she got defensive, thinking they were trying to pull a fast one and steal her blades, nearly starting a fight until they explained Arthur was the lord of the settlement. That finally settled her down. She didn't grasp every little detail, but she understood one thing: this man was here to help her people. Once she decided he was someone she could trust, Alara described the nightmare day the Highland raiders descended on their home. She'd been knocked cold during the raid. By the time she woke up, her brother Finn and the others were already chained up in a dark mountain cavern. They were treated like filth, forced into the most backbreaking labor until Finn finally snapped and forged a desperate plan to get her out. He was going to jump a guard, snatch a blade, and pass it to Alara. Her only job: cut her tethers and leap from the cliff into the raging river below. Finn knew it was her only shot at living. He commanded her to follow his lead, no questions, no hesitation. If the plan worked, she was supposed to find Sir Hector first. The one man they prayed was still out there. With Alara's wild temper, she wouldn't have lasted a week in chains, let alone come up with a plan like that. That's why Finn sent her to the only person he still trusted. Right at that moment, a guard caught them whispering and stomped over, ready to beat them for daring to talk back. That arrogance cost him everything. Finn didn't hesitate. He struck hard and fast the second the man turned his back. Using the heavy beast carcass they were forced to haul, Finn pinned the guard down. Alara grabbed the weapon, hit the water, and let the current take her. That's how she ran into the sea serpent attacking Arthur, and ended up reuniting with her own people. After hearing the whole story, Arthur told her she needed to head to the camp, where Finn expected her to find Hector. But Alara wasn't going anywhere empty-handed, not with that dead sea serpent floating right there. They were hauling that trophy back. They lashed the beast to their mount, Thunder, and dragged it across the dunes, carving a massive trench in the sand as they went. Halfway back, they ran right into Sir Hector and Captain Thorne, who were out looking for their lord. Seeing Alara with him, yeah, they definitely weren't expecting that. It took some time to get the full story out, but Hector now knew the grim truth. 10 more of their kin were still rotting in Highland cages. They had to get them out before the torture started, but charging into a mountain fortress without a plan, that's just a suicide mission. Arthur spent a long time trying to keep Hector from doing something reckless, but then, black smoke on the horizon caught his eye. A signal fire, a warning of a direct attack coming from the western peaks. No wild animal lights a beacon on a mountaintop. Arthur's blood ran cold. He knew exactly what was coming. The Highland warlord had promised blood when he retreated, and a man like that doesn't forget. It looked like the invasion had finally arrived. But he couldn't just guess. Arthur needed to see the border for himself. He immediately ordered Thorn to get everyone to the citadel, while the warriors scrambled to reinforce every last defense they had. Hector and Alara were sent to the western ridge to meet the scouts and prepare an ambush near the traps until Arthur arrived with the heavy hitters. As he sprinted back toward the main camp, he prayed to the gods it was all just a mistake, a false alarm from a nervous sentry. Luckily, Elizabeth was already outside the gates, waiting for him with a look of pure relief. She'd been a nervous wreck ever since the fight on the shore, picturing one disaster after another while he was away. Once she saw he was in one piece, she finally relaxed and offered to scout ahead so he could rest. Arthur shook his head. He appreciated the thought, but that fire was still haunting him. Besides, even with the guards around, Elizabeth wouldn't be able to hold Hector back if he saw the warlord and decided to lose his mind. He chose to handle the front line himself, taking Hangu, Roland, Sam, and Ulrich, warriors who had proven their worth 100 times over. Elizabeth stayed back to manage the citadel and the wounded. Sam had found a hill with a perfect view of the valley. If things got ugly, she could signal for the rest of the army to move in. Arthur wanted to keep the group small, but Lady Mia wasn't having it. She'd never been allowed on a raid before, and she swore she'd follow them anyway if he tried to leave her. With the orders set, Arthur put Sir Lucan in charge of the Queen's Guard and led his squad straight into the west. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, the sun was starting to dip, and that darkness was exactly what Arthur needed. Under that flickering moonlight, spotting the traps was nearly impossible, not to mention the knights lurking in the shadows. But the northern clans, they saw this coming. They marched forward with blazing torches, making absolutely zero effort to hide their presence. Then stop. Just before hitting the kill zone, the chieftain halted the entire clan like he had a sixth sense for danger. He knew Lord Alistair was right there, waiting at the border, and he called him out for a face-to-face showdown. Nobody knew how he pinned Alistair's location so perfectly, and for a second, no one moved. Then, the chieftain dropped the truth on how he hunts. The woods were dead silent. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, not even a single frog. Only a massive group of soldiers hiding nearby could scare the local wildlife into a complete, eerie silence. Alistair's men stayed put, forcing the chieftain to drop the taunts and start making threats. He hated using the dark power of the Forbidden Pact, but he hated this game of hide-and-seek even more. That did it. Alistair finally stepped into the light, ready to settle this once and for all. Turns out, the northern clans were completely surrounded, a massive disadvantage for any normal army. But the chieftain, he actually looked pleased. Equal numbers, perfect. He drew his sable greatsword, challenging Alistair to a duel right then and there. Finally, he could fight without worrying about royal etiquette or dignity. But Hector wasn't about to wait. He saw a chance to avenge the fallen coastal guard and lunged the second he had an opening. Forget honor, forget rules. He went for a shameless strike from the blind side. They were inches away from a bloody collision when a northern warrior shut him down. Miles threw himself into Hector's path with everything he had. Like two massive rams clashing, neither gave an inch as they tore deep furrows into the earth beneath them. At first glance, Miles looked like the underdog because of his size, but his sheer agility. Absolutely insane. The chieftain loved it. He praised the save and told Miles to go ahead and have his fun with Hector. With a massive surge of strength, Miles literally hurled Hector into a jagged rock, sending a shockwave through the very ground. Even Alistair was stunned. Hector had never lost a fight in his life, so seeing him handled like this, seriously alarming. Right then, another enemy knight stepped right into a trap, and 𝒔𝒐 triggered a massive log swinging from the trees. We're talking about a hit that would flatten a normal man instantly. But get this, the guy just shoved the log aside like it was a toy. The sheer, absurd strength of these northern warriors made Alistair completely forget the trap plan for a second. After getting slammed into the rocks over and over, Hector was finally coughing up thick blood. Miles wanted to end it fast. He wasn't losing to some newcomer, but Hector managed to slip the killing blow at the last second. Our boy Hector is stubborn as hell, though, clinging to life until the bitter end. He locked Miles in a death grip and dragged him straight toward the river. The water was Hector's territory, and Miles knew he was in deep trouble. He dug his heels in, desperate to break the hold, but he was stuck. That's when Lady Alina exploded from the river for a surprise backstab. With Miles pinned, it should have been an easy kill for her. But the northern clans don't play fair. They grabbed their own comrade and launched him at Alina like a human cannonball, knocking her right back into the water. These guys are savages. They'll charge into a disadvantage just to keep the fight going. Alina had no choice but to engage the stranger in the cold river. Meanwhile, the twin brothers were actually complaining to their leader. They were promised a good time, but Miles and Silas had already started the party without them. They didn't care who they hit, and their eyes landed right on Alistair, who was busy watching his men struggle. The twins charged him instantly, looking for a quick kill, but Hagen and Lancelot cut them off. You want the king, you've got to go through the guard first. Talk about a buzzkill. The twins split their targets and made a pact. Whoever loses bears the shame of the clan forever. Grinning like absolute lunatics, they dived into the fray, ready to die just to see some enemy blood spill. Meanwhile, Silas was just standing there, watching the chaos and trying to decide who needed help. The guy only knows how to fight, so to ensure victory, he went looking for a bigger sword. He didn't have to look far, there was a log right there. He casually ripped it off the trap ropes, completely ruining the mechanism, and swung it over his shoulder like it weighed nothing. Armed with a literal tree trunk, he charged straight for the duel between the chieftain and Alistair. But the chief wasn't having it. He snapped at Silas to go find his own fight. A bit disappointed, Silas turned away to go find Miles, but Miles was already busy with Hector. Alistair realized instantly that a battered Hector couldn't survive two of these monsters at once, so he moved to intervene immediately. But the Highland chieftain cut him off mid-sentence. He swung his heavy blade with a terrifying force, blocking Arthur's path and demanding his full attention. The warlord was absolutely fuming because Arthur kept ignoring him like he was some common peasant, so he launched a relentless barrage of strikes. Every arc of that black iron sword aimed straight for Arthur's throat, but Arthur's heavy axe parried each savage blow with a thunderous clash. Snarling like a beast, the chieftain slashed wildly, warning Arthur to stop looking away. He wanted a war of kings, a real duel where they both unleashed their true potential. Arthur realized then and there that he wasn't escaping this fight anytime soon, and honestly, there was nothing he could do for Cedric at the moment. Pushed to the brink, he roared out an order for anyone, absolutely anyone, to stop Silas. At that very second, Silas was dragging a massive timber across the dirt, carving a trench in the earth as he slowly advanced toward Cedric. But then something changed. The log suddenly felt like it weighed 10 tons, forcing Silas to glance back, exactly like she'd promised. Lady Mia had finally stepped in on Arthur's command. She was clinging to Silas's weapon with everything she had. Look, in terms of raw strength, she was no match for a titan like him. Silas gave her a quick, mocking look before lunging forward with those massive arms. He tried to grab her by the throat to crush her, but a sudden arrow whistled through the air, piercing his arm, though it barely scratched the surface of his tough skin. Then came a second arrow, aimed right between his eyes. To save his sight, Silas had to raise that same arm like a living shield. But get this, he looked thrilled. 2 playmates at once. For him, this was just getting fun. Seeing how much Silas was enjoying himself, the High Chieftain let the uneven brawl continue. If Silas wanted to play with his food, who was he to stop him? Besides, Once they were back in the mountains, the guy would just be bored and alone again anyway. Meanwhile, Samuel and Audrey were working overtime to cover their friends' backs, firing at every weak point they could find, while Arthur and the others were locked in a bloodbath. They did what they could from a distance, but Audrey's bear trap, the one that worked before, totally failed against 𝒓𝒏𝒐𝒏's. The man didn't just stay standing. He actually yanked Audrey right off her feet by the rope. A monster like this, you can only stop him with pure, raw force. But they couldn't just give up the ambush. Their only choice was to stall for time while Samuel sprinted back to the fortress for reinforcements. While Audrey tried to survive the chaos with whatever gear she had left, Cedric was still locked in a death grip with Mordred. Mordred was desperate to break free, hammering his fists into Cedric's back, but the man didn't budge. Every punch forced a deep, heavy gasp from Cedric's lungs. The hits were so brutal that blood actually started pouring from Cedric's mouth. Even so, he refused to let go, dragging Mordred toward the churning river. In a final, desperate push, Cedric gathered every ounce of strength to lift Mordred off the ground. He charged toward the water, eager to see if these mountain savages could actually swim. Cedric was literally inches from victory when Alina suddenly screamed for him to stop. She begged him not to go into the river. It was a death trap. That soldier who'd been thrown in earlier, he was still under the surface, attacking anything nearby. And just like that, hands suddenly reached out of the water, grabbed her head, and dragged her under. That moment of panic put Cedric on edge, but it cost him. Mordred took advantage of the distraction, raining blows on every exposed spot until Cedric's skin was covered in deep welts. The repeated impact caused internal damage, and finally Cedric's legs gave out. He collapsed. But even on the ground, he refused to let go of Mordred. No way. Channeling his last bit of life into his arms, he suddenly hoisted Mordred up and slammed him over his back, smashing his head into the dirt. It was a devastating impact. Blood gushed from Mordred's forehead as he blacked out instantly. Cedric wasn't doing much better, though. He slumped beside his enemy, his vision blurring as everything faded to gray. In total agony, he left the rest to his house and hoped they could pull off a win. At the same time, Lance and Hans were facing off against the Highland twins. They cooked up a new trick for the mountain tribe and were dying to test it out. To pull it off, they split up and charged from both sides in perfect sync. Xander just laughed, the kind of wild, mocking laugh you hear from someone who thinks he's untouchable. He couldn't believe these rookies were actually attacking him. Seeing Lance lag slightly behind Hans, the twins lunged at him together to shatter their formation. They weren't playing fair, using every dirty trick in the book. Within seconds, Lance was clutching his eyes in pain. Hans wasn't about to let that slide. He rushed in to back up his brother. But instead of finishing off a blinded man, the twins mocked them, telling them to find a real challenge. Without missing a beat, Hans hurled his axe forward, burying it deep in the shoulder of one of the twins. Now the playing field was even. Both sides had a man down. Since he was now weaponless against a black iron blade, Hans raised a small buckler instead. He drew all the heat onto himself, but here's the thing, it was all part of the plan. Even in the heat of battle, he was counting his steps to signal Lance exactly when to strike. But then, the shield failed. The enemy slipped through his guard and plunged a blade into his gut, just 2 steps shy of the strike point. The twins, they still had no clue why he was counting. Just 1 step away, and the trap snapped shut. Harold grabbed 𝒓𝒏𝒐𝒏 by the arms, pinning him down with every ounce of his strength, while Lord Langford prepared the finishing strike. One clean swing of that heavy axe should have ended the beast right then and there. They were absolutely certain the victory was theirs. 𝒓𝒏𝒐𝒏 didn't realize the danger at first, but the second he saw Lord Langford looming over him, pure terror took hold, and he fought like a madman to break free. That was when his brother, Julian, charged in. He shoved 𝒓𝒏𝒐𝒏 out of the way, throwing himself directly under the weight of the falling axe. The lush green grass was soaked crimson as 𝒓𝒏𝒐𝒏 watched the horror unfold. In another part of the field, Alara was doing everything in her power to keep Marion alive. The giant Barnaby, moved with a painful slowness. Alara's arrows hit their mark perfectly, but his skin was so thick he barely even felt the sting. His arms started looking like a pincushion, but the arrows had only pierced a few centimeters deep. This couldn't go on. They were getting nowhere. Marion was barely clinging to consciousness, while that massive log whipped around like a hurricane. Alara knew she had to find another opening, and fast. Luckily, she spotted the same rope they'd used earlier to snag the log. Hoping Marion would catch the hint, Alara started peppering the rope with arrows. Everyone in the kingdom knew she never missed, even in the heat of battle. Marion didn't hesitate for a second and sprinted straight for that rope. At that moment, Barnaby started getting nervous. The resistance had vanished, and he actually thought his playmates didn't want to play with him anymore. But he was wrong. Marion played along, treating him like a massive, overgrown child, while she danced behind him to loop the rope around his legs in a deadly knot. For a moment, he actually enjoyed watching her circle him. Then, boom. His head slammed into the dirt, and the shock snapped him right back to reality. Marion had poured every last bit of her strength into that one move to bring him down. She stood there, finally celebrating the win. Several of the knights had already finished their duels, but Cedric, he wasn't out of the woods yet. He'd barely caught his breath when Mordred rose once again. Mordred admitted he'd underestimated Cedric, who had nearly sent him to the grave, but he still refused to surrender. Then something happened that no one, not even the seers, could have predicted. That massive log that had been swinging wildly, it came flying straight into Mordred's skull, sending him straight to the land of dreams. At that point, Cedric was ready to admit his brother, Finn, was right all along. His luck was actually insane. But the war wasn't over, not even close. The lords of the two houses were still locked in a desperate struggle for their people. Again and again, they clashed, driving each other back. The fight dragged on for so long that both men's arms began to go completely numb. Alistair knew he couldn't survive another direct hit, but looking at his enemy, he could tell the man was in the exact same boat. Seeing the Highland Lord falter, the sorceress's servant brought him the crimson emberleaf. Her orders were clear: use the herb to win, even if he hated the dishonor. If he burned the leaves, the chief could return home a hero. Meanwhile, the servant would dive into the water to hide from the toxic smoke and keep watch. The sorceress had warned of the price of failure. The servant begged him to choose wisely and avoid a humiliating defeat at all costs. Alistair saw it instantly. The enemy was planning to throw away all restraint, fueling his body with crimson emberleaf to match Alistair's primal might as an equal. That crimson emberleaf would have given the invaders a massive, unfair advantage against the newcomers. And yet, the Highland Lord still hesitated to use it. His honor was holding him back. The sorceress must have known his heart, which is why she sent her servant with the herb for a crisis like this. Still, no one moved to light it, and Alistair wasn't about to let that chance slip away. He swung his heavy axe with everything he had, sending out a shockwave so violent it leveled several massive trees behind the enemy leader. The servant only survived because he sensed the danger at the last microsecond and leapt for his life. Once he felt Alistair's cold gaze on him, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. If his leader wouldn't ignite the emberleaf, then he'd do it himself. Snatching up a torch, he grabbed the leaves he'd dropped in fear and moved them toward the flickering flame. He was already imagining his victory. But then the Lord stopped him. With one swift slash, he cut the torch and snuffed the fire, knowing full well this would enrage the sorceress. When the servant demanded to know why, the chief simply looked at him and said he didn't believe a word he said. The sorceress likely never gave that order. He told the servant to crawl back to her and deliver a message of his own. Clenching the leaves in a blind fury, the servant could hardly process the insult he'd just received. He warned the chief that the road back to the sorceress was short, and that he should expect a brutal punishment for his defiance. Alistair watched the whole drama in silence. Even though his destructive power was still rising, the truth was, he could barely even stand. After that brutal clash with the great sea serpent, he'd had zero time to recover before sprinting to the border. Now, even his primal might was running on fumes. His vision started to swim. Alistair knew he was at his limit. He'd be lucky if he could land even one more solid hit before collapsing. And after that, it'd be lights out for him. His soldiers weren't doing much better either. Their strength had dried up long ago. They couldn't support their king anymore. All Alistair could do was trust his own blade and pray the next blow landed true. If he missed, the Highland Lord could wipe out their entire settlement without breaking a sweat. Yet Alistair had another worry. If the chief had just burned the 𝒐𝒏𝒏𝒏, his victory would have been a sure thing. But instead, he chose to argue with his servant and toss the leaves aside. It was absurd, completely irrational, and no matter how Alistair played it out in his head, he couldn't find an answer. Why think when you can smash? Better to use his fists than waste energy on strategy. Every ounce of strength counted. He had to seize the chance and drop the enemy commander for good. Strike after strike, he hammered away, desperate to knock the man unconscious. But the Duke, tough as iron, he matched every move blow for blow. Malachor seemed thrilled to find a rival like Cedric. He goaded him, demanding every drop of power. Only when they were both on the brink of collapse did the Duke notice Cedric's mangled arm. He assumed Cedric had used some dark, sacrificial blood, right to gain that legendary strength. That realization only made the duel more epic, but everyone watching knew the end was coming, fast. Malachor was running on empty, too. The Shadow Seer's unholy blessing was flickering out. He couldn't dodge the next hit, so he threw everything into one final, desperate charge. He wanted a clean finish. He promised that if Cedric fell, the borderland tribes would be spared. A noble vow, and one Cedric truly respected. But mercy, not today. With a primal roar, two clashing forces collided through their steel, triggering an explosion so massive it carved a crater into the very earth. Total chaos. No one could tell who survived or how the war would end. All they could do was wait for the smoke to clear and pray for a miracle. Finally, the warriors saw it, a deep pit in the stone where the bloody Duke of the Peaks lay defeated. Silence fell. They all knew what this meant. The kingdom of the exiles had finally reclaimed its rightful soil. But then, disaster. The bindings on Cedric's arms snapped, and a wave of pure agony tore through his body. If this had happened a second sooner, he'd be a dead man. The ancient crest's power had been his only lifeline in that fight. But the price? Brutal. His legs finally gave out, and he collapsed into the arms of Alara, who refused to let her king hit the dirt after such a glorious win. In the distance, the queen was screaming for help, terrified the seer's servants might return. Cedric's life force was fading. He couldn't even stand, let alone lead an army. He handed his command over to Lady Isabel. Right before the darkness took him, he remembered Alice, who had fainted in the waters, and ordered Alara to save her at all costs. For days, Cedric was dead to the world, while his loyal inner circle nursed him back to health. Isabel took the reins of the kingdom with a steady hand, only returning to the citadel at night to watch over him. But when Cedric finally woke up, oh boy, he found Isabel half undressed beside him. He did the only thing he could, pretended to still be asleep to save her the embarrassment. But then she sat on the edge of his bed, and he nearly lost it. She traced her fingers over his skin, watching for even a twitch. When she'd had her fun, she whispered that she knew he was wide awake. She wasn't planning on a gentle wake-up call. She wanted to toy with her king a little, and Cedric, he was absolutely flustered. He bolted upright, trying to change the subject, babbling about the state of the kingdom like a nervous page. He even tried asking about Lady Alice, but Isabel just leaned in closer, her face inches from his. As she put it, not the time for questions. Teasing him mercilessly, she guessed he couldn't move a muscle and threatened to see exactly what he could still manage in his current state. Honestly, Cedric had dreamed about a moment like this for ages, just not while he was half dead. He'd pictured himself as the dominant hero, proving his endurance, but Isabel's stubbornness was wrecking his entire fantasy. In the end, he just accepted his fate. The image of the fearless king was officially shattered. And then, the Oracle dropped a total bombshell. A new quest, the Sovereign's Trial of Endurance, 7 rounds in a single night. The catch, 1 round had to last at least 60 minutes. The reward was 5 rare mana crystals. The prize was tempting, sure, but the penalty, that killed the mood instantly. If he failed, the Oracle would force him into a vow of total celibacy, losing his manhood forever. Cedric looked at the quest and just couldn't see it happening. He was still broken from the fight with the Duke, and his arm was a wreck. Death sounded easier than this. These conditions were insane. It felt like a boss fight where the hero just hits the quit button before the final blow. After some frantic thinking, he figured he could just outsmart the system. Ignore the quest until it simply vanished. Big mistake. Turns out the Oracle counts silence as I accept. Cedric cried out in pure rage, trying to push Isabelle away while cursing every idiotic quest the system ever gave him. This was officially the worst day ever. The man couldn't even get some rest. He prayed for an interruption, anything. Maybe Isabelle would take pity and go back to her royal duties. Talk about perfect timing. Fate stepped in as Bjorn the Great Bear burst through the doors, smashing half the room and snatching Cedric away. He'd never been so happy to be kidnapped in his life, even if the quest was still ticking away in the background. When Cedric finally told the beast to stop, the bear just huffed, acting like he hadn't just nearly crushed him to death. Ursula dragged Alistair deeper into the shadows of the ancient forest. He was convinced he was about to become a grizzly's dinner. Honestly, if he'd known this was his fate, he never would have left Lady Alara's side. Resigned to his end, he just gritted his teeth and endured the pain until the massive bear finally dropped him right in front of a jagged cave entrance. He was completely lost. Why bring him here? What did these beasts want? He scanned his surroundings, eyes darting for any sign of a threat. Then a deafening howl. Suddenly, 2 small cubs tumbled out from the darkness, tumbling over each other to greet their mother. Alistair froze. It never even crossed his mind that Ursula was a mother. Seeing this fierce predator raising her young, it was a total shock. Right on cue, the system pinged with a new quest. Thanks to their mother's bond, the 2 cubs were ready to join his settlement. The choice was his, accept or refuse. He didn't hesitate for a single heartbeat. He took them in. Just like that, the future defense of his kingdom just got a massive power-up. Give it a few years, and these little guys would grow into elite 4-legged warriors for the clan. He pulled up the stats. Population, up by 20. Military strength, 68 out of 98. The remaining 30 slots were held by his man-eating bear squad. The moment his numbers hit 90, the system flashed a golden notification. New main quest unlocked. The mission was insane. Expand his territory to 10 square kilometers and recruit over 300 people within 6 months. It had been ages since the last major directive. Without that ping, he might have actually forgotten his grand ambitions. The rewards looked incredible, truly, but the difficulty, that was another story entirely. No turning back now, though. It was time to kick the warrior training into high gear and finally teach the rest of the clan how to till the earth. Having 3 man-eating bears on the payroll definitely helped him sleep better. The settlement felt like a fortress, mounting Ursula. He watched the cubs play for a bit. Feeling a spark of inspiration, he decided they needed names. The mother bear seemed to like that idea, perking up her ears as if waiting for his verdict. Most names didn't feel right for beasts that would one day tear through knightly armor. Finally, he made his choice. The brown one would be Leo and the red-furred one, Lucian. They didn't understand the words, obviously, but they could feel their mother's approval, and they quickly nestled into her side. The peace was nice while it lasted, but the quiet days were over. He was about to be buried in work again. Checking the system map, Alistair grinned. He could see every detail of the neighboring clans. Time to start planning an invasion. He hadn't even set foot in the western camp, yet he already knew the terrain, the guard rotations, and every hidden trap. Talk about a cheat code. The plan was simple. 2 days of teaching the new recruits how to farm, then he'd head out for some serious scouting. But first, he was starving. After the brutal clash with the Highland Lord, he still hadn't tasted the sea drake meat. He just hoped they'd saved him a plate. To his amazement, the meat was untouched. No one dared touch the beast without their leaders say so. Everyone knew Alistair was the best chef in the kingdom, so they waited 3 whole days for him to recover just so he could cook. The holiday was over. Our hero finally started packing his gear for the long trek to the rival settlement. He took one of the bears as his mount. It was becoming his favorite way to travel. Adelaide and Lady Alara eventually came out to see him off, wishing him luck on the scout. He left the bear cubs in Garrick's hands, since the man was already busy raising a pack of hyenas anyway. He gave Alara strict orders. Keep the warriors from blowing each other up with the new siege engine. And keep a very close eye on Alina. She still hadn't regained her memory and needed constant supervision. He went on and on until Alara finally had enough. She literally shoved him out the door just to get him to stop talking. Still, he couldn't help but worry about Adelaide. Dee handled the millet planting perfectly, but she looked absolutely miserable. Honestly, she didn't want him going alone. She'd even begged him to send her to deal with those fools in the mountain clan instead. Alara stepped in, reminding her that with a literal bear by his side, Alistair was fine. Constant worrying wasn't helping anyone. Thanks to Alara's firm hand, our protagonist finally managed to leave, leaving the queen in full control of the manor. But the second he was gone, Alara's eyes narrowed. She was keeping a very close watch on Adelaide. The girl was way too attached to Alistair. Her behavior was becoming shamelessly obvious, but Alara wasn't born yesterday. As soon as the goodbyes were finished, she summoned her most trusted spies. The order, follow him, don't lose sight of him for a second. Last time, that bear basically abducted her husband. She wasn't taking any chances. She needed to know if he was actually scouting or distracted. It would probably be for the best if she never found that secret cabin hidden in the woods. Meanwhile, miles away, Alistair suddenly started sneezing like crazy. The cold mountain air was biting at his skin, but he couldn't find the source of the draft. He just chalked it up to his wounds still healing. He pushed forward until he hit a massive, steep peak. He'd have to go around, which was a huge time sink. While the bear looked for a path, Alistair studied the cliffs. If he'd been the one to settle on this mountain, he would have used the terrain exactly like the Highland Lord did. High ground is everything. High ground, the perfect wall. Cedric mapped out the paths, a frontal assault to distract them while his knights hit the rear. But mid-plan, the border guards spotted his massive great bear and rushed out to block the way. Keeping his cool, Cedric announced his title and demanded they take him to their High Lord immediately. Last time, they were the ones starting the war. Now it was the hero's turn to visit, but they slammed the door. "Our lord is busy," they barked. "Get lost, or we'll bury you right where you stand." Cedric had been polite enough, but these savages, zero manners. He gripped his war axe, weighing his options, strike now or wait. Then he saw the captives. He knew what chained prisoners looked like, but these were different. Among the group, he recognized the former clan chief and young Maeve. Strangely, neither of them were carrying any heavy loads. It was a total mystery. He sent Julian over to investigate, and the guards actually stepped back to let him through. What could break a king like this? The truth was dark. Their sorceress stripped every loser of their divine grace, turning them into instant slaves. Just like that, the old chief was a nobody, a king with no crown. A stronger, more ruthless man had seized the throne, and that was the monster Cedric had to deal with now. As if on cue, the new High Lord appeared on the mountain ridges, staring down at them with pure, icy arrogance. He wouldn't even deign to fight. He just sent his soldiers to clean up the intruder. The whole clan was completely lawless. But here's the kicker. They were already experts with heavy harpoons, sprinting up those sheer cliffs like they weren't even there.